Hello, everyone. My name is Adrian Jawort. I'm Northern Cheyenne Tatistas Hemane, which is a Northern Cheyenne two-spirit person, or whatever translates as two-spirit roughly. But I would just like to, before I forget, well, I can't forget because I was like literally crying this morning. But someone mentioned, Sterling mentioned last night, if you were there, it was like this one Blackfeet trans woman, Simone Odessa Little Plume. Yeah, and it was like so weird. I was just like expecting to see her here today, but so yeah, maybe she's sitting right there. So because she'd just be kind of like a staple of Missoula, whatever. It's like everyone in the LGBTQ queer community knew Simone. Oh yeah, that's Simone. But yeah, she tragically passed last weekend, and yeah, I mean, last time I saw her, she was like very depressed, and at this bar, and I just said, "Hey, you look sad," and then I was like in this crazy drag outfit, but I just gave her a big hug, and and just she's like, "Yeah, it's just long-term drama and everything," but then she wanted to talk to me the next day, but I was already literally driving. But yeah, that was just a couple weeks ago, so I just want to, yeah, dedicate this to Simone anyway, and it's just kind of one of those things that, um, let's see, that a lot of transgender, two-spirit LGBTQ people were very, there's a lot of stuff that, I mean, we're like very resilient people, but sometimes, I can't judge her too much since I've just been in those same shoes where we wanted to do self-harm and everything. I guess I did write something like it was in this Transcendent Joy, it's called. Anyways, I'm not going to read the whole thing, just the end part. So I was talking about some activism thing we started, which I do for Humanities Montana. But anyways, the underlying starting point for creating our event was knowing several months prior, 4 Indigenous LGBTQ teens had died of suicide within a single week. We personally knew that darkness created by colonization that convinced these young people there was no other way. And we thought maybe if we saw people so unabashedly like us out in public, they might see a light. And we are by no means perfect, which perhaps makes us relatable to those who have inhabited those cold shadows or reside there. We both acknowledge our lives have been, can be, and even as of this moment, a bit of a chaotic mess. Like I literally couldn't afford my own books, so that's how chaotic my life is. But in that we know we speak for those like us, the flawed, the fuck-ups, the children of alcoholics, the ones who felt they couldn't be loved, the shamed, the pained, the casted out, the sinner, the queer, the real ones, the beautiful, you. So that's my dedication to Simone anyway. So thank you.
It's Heather Cahoon, and I'm excited to moderate this panel for you to talk to these writers and activists. I want to start by thanking our sponsors, Humanities Montana, the University of Montana, Pleiades Foundation, Montana Arts Council, American Prairie, Stockman Bank, and also our generous individual donors. Also, just a note about the James Welch Native Lit Festival was, created to make space for Native writers to talk with other Native writers about their work. So I'm going to do a brief intro of everyone up here. I'll start with Tate Walker. He's a Lakota citizen of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe of South Dakota. They're an award-winning two-spirit storyteller for outlets like The Nation, Everyday Feminism, Native Peoples Magazine, Indian Country Today, and Anomaly. They are featured in several anthologies, Fierce, essays by and about dauntless women, South Dakota in poems, and Norton's Everyone's an Author. Their first book of poetry, The Trickster Riots, was published in 2022 by Abalone Mountain Press. Next, Adrian Jawort is a Northern Cheyenne fiction writer and veteran journalist based in Billings, Montana. Her writing has appeared in the Los Angeles Review of Books, Electric Literature, and Indian Country Today, among others. She is the author of Moonrise Falling, a horror novel, and the editor of and contributor to Off the Path, Volumes 1 and 2, a fiction anthology featuring Indigenous writers from around the globe. A two-spirit transgender woman, she is the political director of Indigenous Transilience. Next, we have Raven Heavy Runner. Grew up on the Blackfeet Reservation and in the Seattle urban Indian community. He was raised by a single mother and his maternal grandparents. He's been a social worker since 1999 and currently holds the position of Director of Social Services at the Blackfeet Care Center. He is a BIA boarding school survivor, Seattle street kid, U.S. Army veteran, stage actor, two-spirit leader, Native activist, and college graduate. Raven is an enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation. So welcome to all of you. So my first question is just an invitation to tell us a little bit about yourselves, how you got into writing, some of the writers or people that have influenced you, and also if you have any stories about James Welch's influence on you as a person or as a writer.
I'll go. I lost rock, paper, scissors. Hey. I'm Tate from South Dakota by way of Phoenix. That's where I live now and love it there. My intro to writing is from journalism. I've been a daily reporter for regional newspapers in South Dakota, Nebraska, Colorado, and then freelancing for the last 20-some years. And that's my first love is First Amendment writing. And especially as it goes into telling the stories of our Native people, there were far too many editors who would look at a story that I pitched and tell me, "You did an Indian story last week. We don't want to overwhelm our readers." And I would say, "Well, we did a lot of white stories just today." And so it became clear that maybe news writing, especially for mainstream papers, wasn't where I could do the most good. So I started doing freelancing and blogs, if you remember those, Everyday Feminism. And I wrote a poem in 2012 when Johnny Depp's Tonto and the Lone Ranger movie was coming out. Sorry, I almost threw up there. Sorry. And people kept asking, well, what do you think? And I could only say, I hate it so many times. And I eventually decided to write a poem about it and posted it to my blog. And it was called F.U. Kimosabe. You can fill in the blanks for what F meant. And it went viral overnight. Hundreds of thousands of hits for this poem. And what was interesting is I really wasn't a poet. I'm still trying to come to terms with that. Yes, I have a poetry book. I like metaphor. So the poem generated a lot of interest, and that's where a couple other publications came in and they reposted it. And it became clear that poetry was a way I could express myself that journalism didn't allow me to do, or any other kind of storytelling that I do. I also do a lot with photography, which I also consider storytelling. So poetry took a back seat, though. I didn't publish anything. And then fall of 2019, someone asked me to read some poems. And I was like, where did you find that blog? It's been buried for years. So they had me read for Indigenous Peoples Day, and that took off. People apparently want really angry poetry from two-spirit fat people. So that's kind of my thing. If I go back to my book, that's what you get a lot of. So that was fun. And the Abalone Mountain Press is the first Dene woman-owned publishing house in the nation, and she allowed a collaboration between my kiddo and I. My kiddo came out as trans non-binary a year and a half ago, and this book is our artwork, and they illustrated this poetry book. So have already won awards for their artwork. I have yet to win any poetry awards, but their artwork has garnered some accolades, and that's something that I'm super proud of, because if I do anything with storytelling, it's to uplift the next generations, and I that's the reason I do it. So it's really great to see young people here and experiencing this. This circle, this community that we're building with writers, it's so important, and I can't tell you what it's meant to meet heroes, old and new. James Welch isn't someone I'm a big fan of. It's not my generation of writing, I guess, but it's undeniable the impact he's had on writers I do cherish, and that he paved a way for them to rise up. I thank him for that. So if there's any, if I can say anything about James Welch, it's that the readers or the authors that I hold dear, they tell me they owe a lot to him. So in that same vein, I also owe a lot to him. So I appreciate being here, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I don't know how to talk without like standing up, so it's like, what do I do with my hands? Okay, I guess what I started writing is I basically almost like kind of taught myself how to read. I think it was like fun and with Dick and Jane books or something, and I like really wanted to read, and I don't know, I just learned the alphabet and just learned, anyways. But as soon as I did that, I mean, before that I was just like making a notebook paper, just folding them in half and making little comics. So I've always been like fascinated by the process of books. We used to have this young authors thing every year at my elementary school, and they'd make like little cloth books, and every year I just loved that, and just like would win their #1 prize award. So yeah, it's not like some magical moment, I guess, other than I've always liked books, so that's when I've always been a writer. But my influences are I was just always trying to like copy other writers and stuff, like other writers I read and liked. It was like Anne Rice, and yeah, but one in particular, that just kind of opened up a world to me. Like this is like right before Jim Welch was this writer, Mary McLean, and they were out of Butte, and it was this memoir, or it was just called The Story of Mary McLean, but she wanted it to be called I Await the Devil's Coming. And it was like this crazy writer out of Butte, and I opened this book up because my grandpa, quick story about him is he actually worked with Paul McLean. He was a newspaper person, like an editor and stuff, and he's like, oh yeah, I know Paul McLean, or knew him, because we're watching The River Runs Through It movie. He's like, he wasn't that handsome though. That's all he said. He's kind of he was like a hard living drunk guy. So it was like, yeah, it made sense. But anyways, where was I? Anyway, he had this collection of all these like early 1900s books that I just like read through them. And there's a lot of M dashes. So there's a lot of M dashes in my work because it was influenced by that apparently. But one of them was this red book, Mary McLean. And it was just like this book about bisexuality and having sex with the devil, and it was just like so raw and so like what the, and I kept, yeah, and I kept like switching back to this is 1902 or whatever it was, and I was just like baffled. I was like, huh, and I just presumed that this woman out of Butte was kind of a known in the literature community, but I'd asked people who knew a lot about literature, and some of them did. Some were like, oh, I heard she's from Butte and stuff. But anyways, not very many people knew about her, so I just became like this later on. It was like my Mary McLean evangelicalist or something with her Wait the Devil's Coming book. But yeah, she's starting to get more popular with she's been in The Atlantic and stuff, and I've written my own little things on her. Anyways, so I go to that was about when I was 16 when that happened. And I just like, you could just write so raw and open about myself and stuff and not be ashamed of it. And that's how this writer was. And I just like, whenever I wrote, it was just like, that was always the influence of, fuck what other people think. This is what I think. And this is me and stuff. But anyways, I was in Fort Belknap, living in the, I was with the now ex-girlfriend, but I was up there. I just like had to say fuck it and abandon Billings. I was living on the High Line with this gal in Fort Belknap, shacked up, as they say, for a couple of months, and then I was like living the life of the character in Winter in the Blood, but I hadn't read that book. I was just drinking, fighting. I wasn't fighting. I don't know. But watching people fighting, drinking, fighting, fucking, all that stuff, and just drifting through days and trying to find odd jobs and stuff to get more money to, it was just like, and then someone noticed I read all the time, and then they said, hey, this book is about, because I'd even go to the Havre Library and stuff, and they said, didn't get more books, and they said, this book's about hair, and they handed it to me. Have you heard of it? And I was, James Welch, yeah, I heard of him, and I didn't know the book was about where I was literally living. And I just started reading it, and it was just like just such a high literary level of just like outside of my door, and it was just like so eye-opening. I didn't think anyone really cared. I was just up there just being like, I don't know, a ghost or something, just like where'd Adrian goes? Adrian's still around, But yeah, but so I didn't, this area that seemingly no one cared about, and he just wrote about it. It just like really showed the power of to me anyway. I could write about what I knew as just surrounding me, whether it was Billings or my own res, and that just opened a lot of eyes. And as long as it was done on this high aesthetic, artistic level, it could transcend to greater empathy and human understanding and stuff. But, okay, so I did this anthology called Off the Path a couple years ago. It was like, yeah, it seems like too long. It's like I don't even talk about it now. But it was like 2014. But Sterling, it was like one of Sterling's first publications. Anyway, it was in there, and it just had this really, I was very proud of it, the high level of talent, because it got like a Stegner Fellowship, and then it got an Iowa Writers Workshop. So if you know, yeah, just the work out of there, and it's like very impressive. And it was a mixed Montana authors anyway. But anyways, the preface to that was basically an ode to Jim Welch. And I guess I'll just read some of it, because just the first paragraph anyway. And it goes, it was the late and great Montana Blackfeet and Grovant writer James Welch who said, I think ethnic and regional labels are insulting to writers and really puts restrictions on them because people don't think your work is quite as universal, end quote. While Welch's stories of inner turmoil universally resonated with readers, he was writing about what he knew as an American Indian growing up in his ancestral and present-day territory that ultimately propelled him to literary eminence. Or, as he noted, he was, quote, a writer who happened to be an Indian who happened to write about Indians. So, yeah, I mean, so here we are, like, years later, and so that's why I'm like, we stand Jim Welch. So, yeah, I had to be here. And just for a quick, another introduction to, even though Raven's not a writer, Sterling thought it would be important that he be here as a Blackfeet Two-Spirit person because, yeah, just to have the vibe of, I don't want to say he's older, but he is older. But, I mean, he looks like he's like 20 years younger, so there you go. Anyways, yeah. So I guess that'll tie into the next question, probably, huh?
So I have gone to school here. Okay, there we go. So I had gone to school back here in '83 to '84, and I think that was the first time I ever heard about James Welch, and that he was both Blackfeet and also Grovon. And I picked up one of his books, and when I read about it, it was stories of, myself. And very similarly, when I had first read some of Adrian's stuff, I was like, oh my God, he's talking about me, just the similar experiences that we had, in Indian country and the effects of colonization around Christianity and, who are we as two-spirit people. And when I think about writers, Native writers today, I think about the fact that where did they initially come from? What was their influences? And for me, I was raised half my childhood by my grandfather, who was born in the 1800s, and he was a storyteller. And so a lot of who he was influenced who I am today. There's a lot of stories that, I don't know whether or not this is true in a lot of like nuclear American families, but in Native families, a lot of times they would take one of the grandchildren and raise them, and it was that child that would carry on the stories that that person had, because their own children, when they were growing up, they had to work and they weren't able to like sit down and talk with them as much. So usually when grandparents retired, they would help out the family by watching the children, and then at that time imbue them with their intellectual property. And our stories that we have today, you can go across, Native America and hear some of the storytellers. Some of them are very similar. That was our intellectual property. That's what we passed down to our children, our stories of where we came from, who we are, how we interacted with the world. And those stories, today are still continuing. If you've ever got a chance to see Smoke Signals, some of those stories kind of are in there, and the humor that's in there as well, which Native humor is kind of very unique. So I think for me, the influence of writers, when I do read Native writers, I believe comes from a lot of our stories. And I've been a storyteller, for about maybe 20 years now. Aside from my doing social work, I've also done theater. So bringing stories onto the stage is another venue. It's kind of like the pages, are there, and you're just watching them being read out. And so how they play into literature today, I think is kind of important, because, the stories, as I said, that, when I first read some of Adrian's work, were the stories of us, and our interaction with the world. And that was the way that our stories that we tell our children, how did you interact with, for those in the Northwest, the raven and the octopus, or how did we come to be in this particular place, and why is the land the way that it is, and for us, all this area around here is where our stories came from. And I just want to pause just for a moment to also acknowledge the peoples of this territory, the Salish and the Kootenai people, because I come from a long ways away. I come from Blackfeet territory, and it's important for me to acknowledge their Aboriginal title to the land, because this is where their stories come from. This is where their children, are being raised off of the land, and where they drew their sustenance from, where their people are buried, where their sacred sites are. And so it's really important for us to be able to acknowledge that. And I was back here, I want to say in June, and got a chance to do an introduction at the Pride Festival, and told them, all this area that you're around, there were two-spirit people here. So, as far as, those that are LGBTQ, we had indigenous LGBTQ people in this area for centuries, and so we do want to welcome you all into the territory. And today I want to welcome you guys into the territory of the Salish Kootenai people. I'm a visitor here as well, and I want to walk on this land in a good way. And I think that's really important to be able to acknowledge that, because there's a lot of power in a place. And I'm grateful to be here and to be able to share this spot with Adrian and our other writer, because it's important for our stories to continue, either in written form, if they're going on to the screen, or if they're just being told face to face. I sit down with my nephews and nieces every now and then, and I'll tell them a story that my grandfather told me. And one thing that I am realizing, is I moved back home 3 years ago, and there are stories that I know that are not in any of the books there, because there were stories that my grandfather told me of back what we called the dog days before we had horses. He told me about the early reservation period, and told me about our introduction to the animals that we have today, the chickens and the pigs, things that we did not have, and just the crazy interactions on how do we care for these things. We don't know how to care for these things necessarily. The first time that we had got chickens, we had the Indian agent come out with an interpreter telling us how to raise them. And, well, he wasn't a very good interpreter. So this old man had got his little box of chicks, brought him home, and he told his wife, well, he told us that those chickens start getting ready to lay, that we had to get that rooster over there. He's got to do a job. Okay. So the rooster, was walking around the yard, and sure enough, that hen wanted to lay. So, the rooster, he told his wife, get that rooster. So she chased that rooster all around, and they chased that hen off of the nest and put the rooster on there, and he broke all the eggs and he took off. He told his wife, get some more eggs. So they got some more eggs, and they put those eggs onto the nest, and they grabbed that rooster, and that rooster broke those eggs and took off again. He told his wife, get a rope. About the time that the Indian agent came around to see how everybody's chickens were doing, he says, so how's your chickens coming along? He goes, oh, pretty good, but I think we kind of got a broken rooster. Oh, what are you talking about? He goes, he didn't quite want to do his job, but we got it. We got him fixed. Indian agent went into the barn, and there was that rooster all tied up on the nest, and that agent was really mean, but he laughed and laughed. And so those are some of the early reservation stories that my grandfather had passed on to me. And so hopefully someday I'll get a chance to write them down and pass them on. Right now it's still, we were initially an oral tradition, but I'm glad that, people like Adrian and other writers are stepping up and writing these stories down, or writing our experiences down, because it's really important for not necessarily us as Native people or us as young Two-Spirit people, but everybody out there to understand those that they live around that may not necessarily be the same as them. So thank you.
Am I on? Okay. Anyways, just to reiterate what it said about the Salish land, one of the coolest stories or whatever, or I don't even know if it's a story anyway, but it was a Corky Irwin. Well, Heather knows him, but anyways, he did this art thing that always sticks in my head. It was just like moccasin footprints, and it was just overlaid. He's like, well, what's that mean? He's just like, well, this represents Salish land, this valley and stuff. We've been here for 10,000 years, so there's not a single place where you can walk on this ground where our ancestors haven't walked before. And I was like, huh. And I was like, but first I was like, 10,000 years, that's a long time. But that's sure enough, that was like the end of the Ice Age when this area cleared up, and Salish people have been here since. So, yeah, anyways, just to also again riff off what Raven said. I know he's talking about he became interested in something I wrote a few years ago. It was like when I came out, it's like, I don't know, 5 years ago, trans. I wrote this article called Native American Rednecks, or something, Native American Rednecks anyway. And it was like, how traditionally we were very sacred people within our tribes and highly respected, and how colonization just basically destroyed that. And what always stuck in my head was in Poplar Indian Reservation, Assiniboine, Lakota Res, Eastern Montana, is like in 2016 they did this bathroom bill, and it was just like an Indian reservation doing this anti-trans bathroom bill. But it was just like, okay, they had this 1-year-old they found in a dumpster, a 4-year-old was raped, and the kid community was devastated. It's like, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Oh, we're going to make a bathroom bill. That's what the tribal council people, and it made no sense. And I was like, could imagine was a Crazy Horse who was known to have a link tape trans people with him all the time because of their medicine, and Crazy Horse being a very spiritual person, just like being in that room saying, "What the f? Why you gotta act all wussichu?" You know, it's just like he would have just been pissed that you're blaming trans people on this. So that always stuck in my head. But, anyways, within that article, I was talking about the colonization of natives and the spread of evangelicalism. How I mean, it's a whole story I could tell, but I do literally do lectures on it. But basically, how the baby boomers kind of grew up, where had to decide either do native ways or Jesus ways, no in between. Native ways are demonic, so a lot of our parents grew up where they just kind of cut off I mean, there used to be a blend of native beliefs and, live in, like, but anyways, so within that article, I had like said something about me. Maybe if I like lived, maybe I wouldn't have been like felt so much gender, what they call it, dysphoria. Yeah, if I just knew that it was okay that that I was trans as a kid, because I just remember as a little kid, I had got sent to church camp, and one of the I can laugh at it now. It's just kind of it's like, but as a little kid, I was like 7 years old, like praying because I thought I was wrong and I thought I was gonna go to hell because I had these like thoughts about thinking I was Himane, which the only uh, familiarity with the word, but there was actually a Himane person I saw in Busby growing up. They were older and still alive. I was like fascinated by them, but they were just minding their own business. I just see them come out and beat a rug or something, but they're like, oh, that person's that woman over there. That's actually, they were born a man and they're Himane. It's like, oh, but I don't know whatever happened with them, but they were elderly at the time. But also the movie Little Big Man. So, but it was also kind of a mixture of things like, yeah, I mean, since Little Big Man's told us very kind of comedy and stuff, but I didn't want to be that person people laughed at either. It's like, you look tired, Little Big Man. Would you like to come to my teepee and rest on soft furs? And I can laugh at it now, but I didn't want to be that person. So it was like this old mixture of things. But anyways, so within that article, Native American rednecks or whatever, I kind of pretty much as like I almost took it out. It was about coming out as like, maybe I wouldn't have felt like so bad about being being gender fluid. I wasn't ready to come up fully as trans. I was just going to say, well, I'm going to, and I just, what, and I took it out and I put it back in and then I sent it, and I didn't think, anything of it, because Indian Country Today was still, they had rebranded, and they had, I was like, well, maybe some people will see it, maybe some won't. But then it kind of went viral, that article. And I just remember Jake Tapper of CNN retweeting the article. And I was like, me coming out of the closet was announced by CNN. I joke now, but yeah, I mean, after that, everyone saw it, and they're like, oh, I didn't know they knew I was a Native activist, so I just, right away, I had to jump out and be like, we want you to talk here. And I was like, okay, yeah. So I just kind of like went out full force. But at the same time, I was kind of prepared for it. I knew that was my duty as Himane Two-Spirit person, that is our role in culture, is to be one of those people that says the things that shouldn't be said. That's why probably I'm a good lobbyist that tells Republicans what they need to hear. So, but anyways, yeah, I guess I'll let Tate talk about them.
Sorry. Not Blackfeet, so I don't go on for 3 hours like some people. My name is Tate Raven, by the way. It always reminds me of that, speaking of CNN, the news article that came out after the 2020 election where they did a breakdown of the demographics of who voted, and it was like, white people, African Americans, Asians, and something else. That's kind of how I feel. And that person, something else. I'm not quite sure what I'm talking about. Two Spirits? My traumatic coming out story. Let's see. Trying to make it funny, but it really wasn't. Conversion therapy. Let's see. So I was a teenager in Bismarck, North Dakota. If any of you know about that place, the No Dapple is a smidgen of the wrongs that they've committed there. But I didn't have words for like non-binary or even like bisexual. It was more or less I'm Catholic and I liked a girl, and didn't really know what to do with those feelings, and acted out in lots of cool ways. Thank God there was no social media back then. You probably wouldn't have asked me to come talk to you. You'd be like, what? Criminal. And so, there was some stolen cars and some drugs and some alcohol. And when I was getting some therapy, my parents sat me down. They're like, well, tell us what's wrong. And it was very like cinematic. Like the camera pulled back and I was like, I am gay. And had no idea what that really meant, actually, but knew that they were searching for something, and I was the best I could give them. And that was being raised by Irish Catholics. That was a little tough for them to swallow. Anyway, so I went to a group home for last part of my high school career, and that wasn't fun either. This is really funny, guys. I love talking about this. But what was great about the group home, like a lot of communities within Indian country, border towns in particular, Native youth make up a vast majority of the kids in the system. So I think my group home, it was state run, but it was all natives. And one thing they did was that native programming to try to, feed us some of our culture back, even though it was all run by white people. But it was a start. I had always been, I was in a family of more or less performative powwows, feathers, and pottery natives. If we had those and we danced, we were enough, which is fine. That was an intro. But I'd never gone to ceremony. I'd never been to a sweat lodge in Ipi or anything like that. And what could have very well have been a terrible experience, it was a sweat lodge in Ipi led by the men from the prison that was down the road from us, and they led us in Ipi in ceremony. So it was co-ed, and like I said, it could have been bad, but it was amazing. It was beautiful. It was my first experience with sweat, and the leader told the story of Tate Sanwi, a white buffalo calf woman, and that was just a phenomenal shift for me. I had never heard a story about a powerful woman before, let alone a woman who smited the first guy that was having impure thoughts about her. Up until then, being femme presenting anything femme was bad. Got taken advantage of. It wasn't a power move by any means, and especially being queer, I was the lowest of the low. And so Tate Sanwi had a very profound impact on my trajectory, not just as a person, but as a queer youth coming up as an adult. That led me to seek out more of my Lakota values and traditions. In college, I took a gender and sexuality course, and that was where words started to come alive for me as what do you identify as, and queer just became sort of that umbrella term. And then I met Nadle, Dene Two Spirit, who told me about Two Spirits, really, and I had never been around any of that kind of language before, and so I was preparing for my first Sundance in college, and the elders, it's a long-term process. It's not something you can just go and dance and you're done. It was a year-long preparation of sobriety. You had to be prepared. You're praying for the people, so you got to be the best you can be. And that also meant mentally and emotionally. So I had to come to terms with my gender and sexuality. And the elders that were part of my preparation were fundamental to understanding that part of myself and how that part of myself was medicine. They gave me, in prayer, I was given the name Wian Witko. And Adrian mentioned Crazy Horse, who's Tashunka Witko. So Witko is terribly translated to English as crazy, but it's not the epithet that it's sort of turned out to be now with mental health. Crazy was a recognition that you saw beyond the boundaries the world had given you, and that's what made Crazy Horse a phenomenal leader. So Wian Witko was a crazy woman, and the medicine that they helped me discover, if you will, was storytelling through this power of being two-spirit. So Wian Witko, a lot of folks use Winkte as sort of the umbrella catch-all for queer in Lakota, but Winkte is only a small piece of the identities that two-spirits can take on within Lakota. Our traditional stories are super queer. And one reason I chose the trickster, Iktomi, the spider, for my muse, if you will, for the poetry book, is that, Iktomi's the original queer powerhouse, breaking down barriers and forcing us to see outside of a status quo, if you will. You might not like the path he leads you on, but he's going to drag you through the spirit world and force you to come to terms with the life that's around you. And I just thought, what a fantastic what a fantastic being to model yourself after. As he told me, a trickster, someone who, blatantly defies what people are telling them to do. And that always sort of felt like something I was doing anyway, the black sheep of the family type thing. So, so from that first Sundance and praying for the people within that power of two-spirit, Wian Witko, I got to tell you that was a phenomenal shift for someone who had been taught that queerness was evil. And so that's been where my well of medicine, if you will, comes from. So what's great about that though is I have ADHD and I can't help. What are you guys talking about? And then no, I was kidding. No, sorry, I did take my meds today, but it's hard. I want to be part of it. So one thing I love about the experiences I went through, right? Well, there's a lot of trauma in there, but there was a lot of knowledge to be had and gleaned, especially as I meet, really old elders. Hey, I'm just kidding. No, you're just so young. No, really. As I meet elders who have been there and who have, they're here, right? They exist. And so much of being queer is being told you shouldn't exist. I'm from Arizona, where every law that comes out seems to be telling young people, like my kid, you shouldn't exist. You shouldn't participate in this life, which is complete bullshit. So these traumas, these experiences that we've had as two spirits, I think, help us with the young people coming up. I mentioned my kiddo came out as trans non-binary, and I got to tell you that it's been an amazing connector for us, trying to allow them to explore what medicines they have to offer. Stories come alive in so many different ways. Raven's stories of oral storytelling, that's just as important as anything that can be canonized in literature. I work full-time for a tribal school district in Arizona, and one of the things that we've really shifted toward, especially within our English literature curriculum, is that oral storytelling is just as important, if not as important as anything they could ever read. And so kiddos get credit for listening to elders and being able to tell those stories back to us within the system. So there are ways to incorporate the oral storytelling traditions of our people. And if two spirits can lead the way, I say more power to us.
Can I?
we're going to have Tate read some of her work, some of their work, then Adrian read some of her work, and then we'll come back to you, Raven, for that last question about what being Two-Spirit means to you and how does it influence your work. Tate?
Yes. Can't wait. Okay. I'm so prepared. Okay. All right. I read that one. We'll do a funny one because I don't know. There's a lot of trauma in here. But one thing about the trickster is that there was always a lesson to be told within the stories we have of Iktomi. Is it on? What? Oh, guys, my mother beaded this, by the way. I know, and I'm sure she's watching. Hi, Mom. And so, thanks, Mom. And that's been a journey, too, is having my family love me for all that I am in that way, too. So when you can support our Two-Spirit youth, a lot of magic happens there. I can't find it. It's gonna be great. The suspense. Let's see. This poem's called "The Sovereignty of Humor." We've been talking a little bit about the power of jokes and laughing and humor, and I wrote this as part of the Oak Lake Writers Society, which is a Ochedi Shakui writers group, Lakota Dakota Nakota, led Craig Howe. Dr. Greg Howe is a huge inspiration to me, and like Adrian said of James Welch, as others have said, write what you know, and that'll resonate. So, resonate. Hey, what am I, a poet or something? Okay. The sovereignty of humor. There's an expression with many uses and many meanings. It's more than a word, more than a sound. In every utterance, it evokes fun. It's a jab, a punchline, a joke unto itself. It's verbal currency, better than a passport, a priceless family heirloom, the maker of relatives. In grade school, we learned about American Indians, or at least the stoic Edward Curtis version of how Indians were supposed to look. The vanishing race, a people sad and depressed and all but extinct. We could be vicious too, in movies and history books, but always we were defeated, and no one wants to be on the losing side. These images, these stereotypes of an ever-frowning people contrast sharply with the laughter and jokes of the Tioshpe I grew up with. Sure, there were low moments like down to the last dollar and oh my God, call the police low. But in all that, we find reasons to smile, reasons to cheese out, commode style. And that's the thing about Native humor. It's kept us alive. And all of that represents isn't just for entertainment. It's an endurance tactic. Like air, water, food, and shelter, our people need humor to thrive. Recognizes what we've survived together. It's a sorry, not sorry testament to shouldering the crushing weight of poverty, genocide, diabetes, boarding schools, massacres, addiction, and Disney's Pocahontas. Without the protective armor of Indian humor, we'd be dead inside. Indian humor says, "Not today, colonizer." Indian humor reclaims the life, hate, and fear and manifest destiny have tried to remove and assimilate. Resistance is only futile if you can't laugh about it later, because you realize a belly-jiggling guffaw pulls you up better than any philosophical bootstrap. Indian humor recognizes the irony in celebrating code talkers who saved World War II with the same languages their country tried to beat out of them as kids, and the irony in denying voting rights to the people who had land stolen and treaties broken to form a democracy modeled after the Constitution of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Indian humor mocks those who say racist mascots are an honor as they whoop and chant like the tomahawk-wielding savage their ancestors killed. Indian humor mocks the stupidity of white Hollywood saviors like Kevin Costner's wolf-waltzing John Dunbar and Johnny Depp's taxidermically adorned Tonto. Indian humor mocks every claim to Cherokee royalty that conveniently ignores Cherokee struggle. Indian humor mocks the ridiculous disrespect of hipster headdresses. Oh, yes, those hot pink chicken feathers sure are secret. Get over it, you say. Trust us. We're so over your bullshit. It's you that can't seem to let go of our identities. Indian humor winks at the camera when Native women overtake the same government systems that refuses to protect them from going missing and murdered. And winks again when the same face masks police ripped off protectors at Standing Rock must now be worn to save lives from a virus fueled by climate change. Indian humor is dark hair, thick with greasy secrets you wish you knew, and cheekbones that can cut down bad spirits. It's your grandma's squinty, tear-filled eyes and soft, wrinkled hand covering her toothless grin. It's your sister's head thrown back, a gut-busting cackle spewing from her defiant smile as she slaps your arm hard. Indian humor is your uncle teasing you relentlessly with love-filled lessons, and you eventually learn the joke is on your ego, so be humble, dammit. Indian humor reminds anyone who forgets we're still here. It builds up the next generations and tells them at every opportunity not to turn back, but to keep going into the future. Indian humor is a sovereign act, and our laughter is medicine. It's the battle cry of aunties everywhere. Everyone say it with me. Nice. Thank you.
Hey. Okay, since I have to I don't know. I'm very performative, but I don't know where to stand now, so I feel awkward talking behind their shoulder, so I'll just go really close to the camera and stare at it. Okay, this is like a this is like a a preview of my novel I'm working on. It's called and this working title is "And Then There Was No More Art." So this part in here is actually I just kind of created a short story out of it, so it's not like anyways, but it gets the gist of yeah, I'll just jump it. I mean, I guess I can only read like half the short story because it's not very short, but but anyways, yeah, it's talking about it's kind of based off obviously a lot of my real life experiences. One was when I was like 19 years old. I was like selected by this big modeling agency out of 80 people and stuff. But that was back when I was this handsome young man. I mean, I used to be a guy, but we all make mistakes. So, anyways, but here I am. So, but yeah, I just remember just a quick story about that modeling agent, and I had to put that in there. He was so crude. It's like this snooty gay guy, but he was just like he would say things. It's like this lady was like, yeah, don't take it personal. He'll give some constructive criticism. You won't take it personal. Or just like, and they're like, okay, yeah, I won't take it personal. These naive kids going up there. It's like, yeah, you're pretty for small town high school, but not for big city modeling. Next. And those kids are like crushed. It's like, don't take it personal. That's going to be on their headstone, you know? Here lies Becky, pretty enough for small town high school, but I mean, her dreams are crushed. But anyways, Andre never did go to the Denver modeling headquarters the next month for their first modeling show, claiming they didn't have the means saved up to living in the city, although they were shared a motel for a time and immediate payment. But truthfully, it was because they didn't have the will for such a drastic change. After letting the modeling get fade away, they felt guilty for ending up wasting the agency and photographer's time. They always wondered what could have been after going back to working construction and seasonal winter jobs, followed by evening escapades of mass amounts of beer and weed with kinky sexcapades on the weekend when the baby went to a grandparent's house. Still, the brief modeling foray had piqued Andre's interest enough, and they'd write a fair amount of Native American fashion articles when they later started doing freelance journalism. Unsurprising there, but After Andrea left Haley for good when she delved too far into drugs and the baby ended up on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation on Montana's Highline with their grandma, there were no outlets for them to be feminine while living with various male roommates. Their proclivities learned like seeing colorful flowers and desiring to smell them up close, especially after they saw a gorgeous native woman at a downtown dive bar one night. As they eavesdropped and thought of what they might say to her, the woman mentioned to her gay bartender friend something about having to tell a potential date she was a trans woman. After the disclosure, the guy immediately stood up and walked out on her without another word. The bartender said, "Well, that's too bad. They stupidly missed on a date with a beautiful woman." She took it in stride, threw her head, hair, and drink back, laughed, and said, "Damn straight they did. Hey, I'm just glad they didn't try to fucking hit me. It's like they hit on me, and then they want, like, hit on me like it's somehow my fucking fault I gave them a hard on or whatever. Ha!" The bartender gave her one on the house and asked her how the new job was going. Apparently, she worked evenings at a special needs home and mostly drove a van for them to various places. Last night, it was the grocery store, and one man had an outburst. She calmed him down quick enough, but not before some cunt complained loudly about the disruption and disrespect to other customers. Andre wouldn't have guessed he was biologically male, but it didn't matter. They weren't attracted to her fucking chromosomes. They lamely thought an opening line to her might be, "Well, I'll still date you," and offer to buy her next drink, but it sounded too simpish. Instead, their courage froze as they sat there pounding their own beers, lost in a fresh fascination of excited thoughts, side-eye studying and enviously admiring her confidence in tight black jeans, highlighting a cute bottom with a red long-sleeve form-fitting top and matching lipstick along with shoulder-length, glistening black wavy hair she must have put some good time into. Their longing went from wanting her from wanting to be her. That weekend, while home alone, they dug out a secret stash of clothes that was a black bandage dress and torn nylons. After shaving their goatee, they put on the forbidden garments in a euphoric wave until they noticed their former slender, girlish, curvy figure beginning to fade into typical adult male bulk. It was only a couple years ago when Andre nearly had the same lithe body of the trans woman in red at the bar, sans tits. Back then, while fully dolled up and dressed up, they'd often take one last admiring look in the mirror, imagining what it'd be like to live as a full-time woman in the city as opposed to some in-the-closet presumed cross-dresser fetishist. Sometimes, before going back into boy mode, silent tears speaking more loudly than they cared to admit assisted the scrubbing of dark makeup and clothing removal. Someone would be there soon, or they'd have to go to work in the morning. Tinges of childhood shame stemming from the voices of the evangelical churches they were raised in resurfaced. Biblical verses reminding them, "Neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do are an abomination unto the Lord." They annually cried their little heart out in fear on the prayer benches at church camp. Surely, if they were born Himane, she would be cast into the lake of fire. As a teen, their artistic sensibilities began to override youthful guilt, emboldened to the idea they were not conventional in an area where conservative predilection must be safe from perceived danger. A line protected when LGBTQ people occasionally got jumped and beat down for simply having the audacity to exist in southeastern Montana, as fair warning to keep other faggots in check who too might have the audacity to be proud of such perverted sin. Still, they knew they were art that needed an audience, and good art always trespassed lines. With constant flashes of the woman in red, as they reference her, smiling shyly at them, obsessing their memory, they began to jog at the local middle school's track after work when it cooled down after sunset, doing hundreds of sit-ups and squats afterward to combat such burgeoning male bulk and attempt to beckon their former slender figure. They started counting calories, even and cut back on beer. Inspired a stunning native trans woman was somewhere in town right now, despite its LGBTQ phobic and racist reputation, representing their true aesthetics of inner and outer and indigenous beauty. Next time, they were determined to talk to her and not puss out, and who knows if they could become like her. They were seriously considering going to the University of Montana Journalism School, which had been actively encouraging Native writers to apply. And with the more protective environment of the liberal university town of Missoula, hey, I know what that is. It undoubtedly striking the resolve to become more themselves and embrace the forbidden word of Himane, and truly decolonize beyond the buzzword. While in femme, they didn't need weed or alcohol to obtain happiness and raw confidence, not just in a vainglorious way, but legit loving who they were. Someone not ashamed of their inherent feminine mannerisms and natural way of being they otherwise had the stressful core of constantly trying to suppress in public. Andrew went out to the same dive bar several nights a week, hoping to catch her again, yet they were too shy to ask the bartender about her. Well, with Andrew being pretty, even without female attire, they drew the attractions of other Native women who always knew something more about them. They'd bluntly say in their respective res accents, "You hold your beer like a girl, you know," or outside especially. This one, they smoke like a girl too. And even, "This one, they really walk like a girl too, innit? Oh yeah, innit? Holy, got that sexy hip sway even. Eh?" That was probably Tate. So. But a male might even try to stand up for them. "No, they're not gay. I seen them that one day play some wicked shutdown D at the park when we were playing ball. I heard they got a kid from that one from Fort Belknap too, innit? What was her name? Haley. I haven't been with her a couple of years now. But anyway, dude, like, being gay doesn't work that way. It just means, never mind. You talk really white too, you know," the Native woman said. "You sure you're not gay?" Eh? "No, I'm not like attracted to dudes," Andrew said. "I'm into chicks, but truthfully, although they had sex with several delectable men over the years, they never felt gay while doing it. Imagining their woman while it was being done, just as they did with Haley and her toys. While Native women also equated Andre's bashfulness as another sign of being gay when they moves on them, quit acting shy. Native men, for the most part, generally respected them for their basketball ability, modern day wear props, and as such, you didn't call someone you respected gay unless you were ready to fight. Likewise, you didn't know you got soundly beaten in queer, even beat up by a supposed queer. Plus, Andre was intimidatingly smart. They were so well read, which offered another protective shield and explanation of why they spoke so articulately. "They're a writer too, innit? Really smart, this one," they'd say with a nod, excited to be drinking with someone always getting published. Well, they were discreetly hooked up with men they met in seedy porn stores and well-to-do places where professionals convened. Andre always insisted on wearing whatever articles of women clothing were convenient while being penetrated to help them feel femme, even if they had to stop at an adult store to get an item or two. To initiate mating rituals with men, they'd smile flirtatiously, letting their all-natural feminisms and voice know what they had sought, as they became easy submissive prey to men who oft wore wedding bands. The initial pain and warmth of being entered turned to pleasure when physical and mental ecstasy followed by the eventual ejaculation in or on them, as they themselves sometimes came from penetration alone. Such became their personal ultimate validation of womanhood and own timeless power of pussy. I didn't know where I wrote that, but anyways, one Friday evening, the woman in red finally came in wearing of all colors, a knockout red dress and high heels, looking oh so flaming with her shapely legs and dark glossy nylons. She constantly peered out the door in the direction she came from, then hurried to the bar. It was almost game time. Andre was nervous, used to alpha women approaching them instead of vice versa. They planned to offer buying her a drink when they got up to get a new one. Hopefully, they'd remember seeing them previous. Of course she would. She smiled at them last time, didn't she? Instead, she had her head down, shaking it. The bartender had gone through the swinging door to the other side of the bar, putting his hands on her back to ask, "What's the matter?" She said, "I'm good. Just give me a minute." Andre walked up to the bar and sat on a stool about 20 feet away, wanting to give her a comfortable space, yet close enough to be nosy. I'll give you a minute, the bartender said and apologized. Andre said, no worries. After getting Andre's pint, they waited for what happened to eventually spill. It didn't take long. After Andre's first drink, she said in harsh words in contrast to her soft-spoken voice, fucking cops. All I want to do is fucking look pretty. That's not a crime. She fought back, her sadness with righteous anger. What'd they do this time? The bartender said. I didn't do anything, she said. Well, I know you didn't, he said, so tell me what they do. You don't have to tell me, though. He glanced in Andre's direction. She paid no mind. Well, I got dropped off on the street by my friend because no parking, and she had to go to work and was in a hurry, right? I told her it was okay if I walked a couple blocks, and she's like, in Hills? And I was like, yeah, don't worry, I'm a pro, don't you know? But like right after they crossed the street, cops turned their lights on and start fucking with me. They claimed I was jaywalking just because I hurried up before the light turned green. She went on how the police accused her of being a hooker, and loudly called her a cross-dressing tranny, and right in front of another more popular bar up the street where people sang karaoke every night. The police asked her, why else would a man dress up like that if they weren't prostituting? And then a crowd started forming. She said people were yelling, faggot and pervert and sicko as she stood there with nowhere to go. I felt so scared, she said. One of the most beautiful women Andrew had ever seen looked like she was going to cry. All I wanted to do was look pretty, she said. Then a couple of them, they were following me here. Please don't let them in. You tell me if they come in. I'll ask them to leave. Andre only wanted to hug her and shed a tear for her, to tell her she was not just pretty, but gorgeous. Tell her she was not only pretty on the outside, but inside. They knew it'd sound trite, but they'd mean it. They were beautiful, living art. They wanted to confess they admired her constantly and thought about her much of the last month, but realized they were just some random person at a bar and might be another potential threat who might hurt her as far as she was concerned. The woman in red straightened her shoulders to regain her composure. Her eyes conveyed a mixture of pain, humiliation, and yet determined resilience. Any lingering thoughts of Andre's own coming out and inner fire were doused when a minute later, when the woman in red stared at the mirror behind the bar, smiled slightly, and a large tear raced down her cheek. She put her head down to wipe it. I just wanted to look pretty tonight, she choked out again to no one in particular, and quickly went to the ladies' restroom. Andre realized they couldn't be as strong as her. She must have slipped out when Andre went to take a piss, and they never saw her again. They oft wondered if she left town, and sometimes thought of asking the bartender whatever happened to her. But just in case she was now an official apparition, they did not. And then there was no more art.
Thank you, Adrian. So we'll just back up just a little bit, back to the question that both of them answered earlier. So can you tell us what Two-Spirit means to you and how it influences your work, including your activism, which you all share in common, but for you dates back 30 years?
Back in 1992, a friend of mine, a Two-Spirit woman who is Nimipu, they call him Nez Pierce, had written this play. And it was kind of interesting because, as you were talking about, your name, Crazy, that what was interesting, her and I would often sit and visit and drink coffee and, go different places around the city when we were living in Seattle. And we were sitting in this McDonald's one day, and this guy was by the window just talking to himself and just like, having this really intense conversation. And I looked over at her and I said, long time ago, our people took care of them because they believed that they talked to the other side. They had the eyes to be able to see things that we couldn't see. So we had to take care of them because maybe they had a message for us from the other side. And so it was really important. And we sat there for a while, and we had a lot of different discussions. And so, a couple of years later, she wrote this play and she asked if I could be in it. And it was my first time ever, doing theater. But as we were reading through the play, she talked about this Native woman who, kept getting thrown into institutions and ending out on the street, and because she would see these characters, and she said, "Does this dialogue or anything ring a bell?" And we talked a lot about a lot of things, and she was that crazy person who was in McDonald's that time. That's where this character kind of came from. And so it was really kind of interesting. But I guess playing back to like the idea of Two Spirits, it was around that time that I started reading books on, at the time, Two Spirit had not come into being yet as far as a word that was used within the Native community. And this was back in I would say the late 80s. There was a book called Spirit in the Flesh. It was written by Walter Williams, and he had gone into a lot of the archives and started pulling out these stories of non-straight Native people, and found that these people fulfilled roles that people did not realize that they fulfilled. That in some of the Midwest tribes, that their Two-Spirit people had to be at a treaty or an agreement amongst other people because of the unique perspective that they brought, and they wouldn't hold any type of negotiation unless their Two-Spirit people came out. Other Two-Spirit people were part of their creation stories, within the Pueblo people who came up out of the Kivas and stuff like that. It was a Two-Spirit person, actually like a person who was both male and female, who had brought them from the previous dimension into the dimension that we're in today. So those stories were stories that showed that as Two-Spirit people, we had a place all the way back to creation within our people. Within the Navajo people, they had a story where a Two-Spirit person, the Natle, saved their nation. Because I don't know if you know this, but sometimes men and women don't get along. Those men, they're blah, 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 blah. And then those men are like, those women, they're always blah, blah, blah. Well, in the Navajo tribe, they got so upset with each other that they said, fine, we're not going to have nothing to do with them anymore. The women went on one side of the river, and the men were like, good riddance, and they stayed over there for quite a while. And the Two-Spirit Natalie was like, if they don't get back together again, they're going to die. They need each other. And it's a long story. It deals with all the things that went on to be able to get them back together again. But eventually, the Natle went in between the men and the women and talked with them and negotiated a treaty, and they finally came back and saved the Natle, the Dene people. And so these stories were stories of how we influenced our people and helped them. And in a lot of different tribes, those roles, they were, they varied. Some of the people were because they didn't have children of their own, they took in the orphans. Because they had time to be able to go out and study plants and medicines, some of them became the medicine people, the healers with the herbs and stuff. Others had time to be able to learn, stories and be able to convey them, and they became the teachers and the historians and the ones that had kept the stories for the people. I have a friend of mine by the name of Johnny Moses, and he's a master storyteller in the Northwest. And Johnny Moses, every year, for 4 days, holds a storytelling saga of his people. And the people come around and they listen to these stories, and they start from the beginning and they go for 4 days. And the stories not only are being told, that's one piece, because a lot of us, we're oral, learners. We hear and we learn that way. Others, they have to do something in order to learn it. And others, they have to use their voice, And so when they would have these storytelling sagas, he would tell the story and he would say, okay, this is the song that goes with that story. And he would sing the song. And everybody who knew the song would sing along with it. And then the last part of it was like, okay, now here is the dance that goes along with it. So the physicality of that was all these different modes of telling this story inculcated the person's brain in different areas for them to be able to learn and remember these stories. And like I said, this went on for 4 days. And so one of his stories about Raven and Octopus, they would get up and they would dance because, for some reason, Octopus wanted to kill Raven. I don't know, maybe because he squawked too much and, whatever it was, but he had tricked Raven coming into to the low tide and just was telling him, oh, your feathers are so beautiful. Where did you get them? Look at them. They just kind of glisten in the sun, and put another tentacle around Raven. And the tide was coming in. Oh, Raven, you have the most beautiful voice. Where did you get that voice? That's a beautiful. Can you sing a song for me? And another tentacle went around him. Got to the point where Raven was realizing, oh my gosh, this tide's coming in. This guy's going to kill me. And they started fighting. So part of the dance had to do with them going around the longhouse and dancing the Octopus and Raven dance. And so as a two-spirit person, he was one of the people that carried on this very important intellectual property, disposition to the people that were there. And I think that, as I look at who I am as a two-spirit person, and I realize all the different roles that two-spirit people play, and those that I've come into contact over the years, sitting down, especially young people who don't know if they have a place within the greater world, within their own tribe. Because of colonization and Christianity, a lot of these roles were taken away. Our people didn't talk about them, because if they talked about them, then somebody who could come in and do something might know. And so a lot of times, just for the protection of those roles, sometimes they weren't spoken of. And so now, in this time and age, and the fact that over the last 30 years, these stories are coming out, they're looking into like the literature of ethnographers that came through, and sometimes we as Native people kind of struggle with the fact that we have guests here that are still here, and they leave hair on our soap and stuff like that, and gosh, when are they going to go home, right? Well, we have to realize that all different cultures bring different things to each other. And one of the things that I'm grateful for is the fact that, those stories were written down. As they seen these different roles of people playing, within their tribes, they were like, this person is wearing a dress and everybody has no problem with that. Or this person is doing this, and gosh, it's almost like an honored role. And, where we're from, we don't look at it in that way. And so they wrote down all these different roles that they seen as they traveled across Turtle Island. And it was those things that were hidden for a while. And finally, some of our Native researchers and non-Native researchers that were interested in this started pulling this out and going, did you know this? And for myself as a Blackfeet person, that's also, I wanted to know, were there Blackfeet two-spirit people prior to myself? And of the people that I've come in contact with, if they were, Anishinaabe, or if they were, Lakota, or wherever they were from, they wanted to know, did we belong before all this colonization happened? And the great thing about it is our young people were able to tell them, yes, you have a place, you have a responsibility, you have a role. And if part of that is writing, if part of that is storytelling, if part of that is teaching, if part of that is just being a role model and stepping out there in whatever garb that you have and holding your head high so people know that we are a proud people, we belong, I think that's important for our young people. And so, as you said, where was my journey? My journey was to find out and validate myself as a person, as a two-spirit person. And so over the years, that's one of the things that I wanted to know, because I have two-spirit people within my family. And I want them to know that they belong, that they have a role, and they have a responsibility. And so I think that for me, I'm continuing this work. I've been going to two-spirit gatherings since '93, and I just sat down and just rolled up my sleeves and just asked them, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to help with sweat? Do you want me to help with the food? And just sitting down with some of our two-spirit elders. And, it's been 30-some years, and now people go, oh, wow. Guess you're the elder now, eh? But I think about this now because of having lived through an era when HIV and AIDS was taking away a lot of our two-spirit people, and that a lot of those people with that knowledge, aren't here today, and so somebody has to carry their stories, and that's what I hope that we do. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to be the mic runner. We have about 8 minutes for questions. Or were you going to add anything, Adrian, though?
Yeah, I just wanted to riff off Raven, so I'll talk really fast. Use my lobbying voice. Anyways, he's mentioned the Nodlehe, the Navajo. It's just something that always struck out me. It's like something I read before about him. It's like some ethnographer or whatever. Anyways, because it seems like they treat them as like they're practical royalty, like almost like deities. So, but yeah, that just reminded me of when all the conquistadors and stuff first came over to the Americas. It was like we always thought the doctrine of discovery. Doctrine of discovery is why they, were taking their lands. But there was actually a lot of controversy within that, with the theologians and stuff, saying we can't just take their land based off this. It seems kind of iffy and unchristian. I mean, but they said, oh, but what if? Okay, you can do it on 3 conditions. If they're cannibals, which there wasn't very many cannibals, and incest, but there wasn't too much any incest, or if they were practicing sodomy, and then they'd show up at these temples and stuff, and that's where they see these two-spirit people that were just like temple goddesses, coming out, and there's like, oh my God, that's demonic. They'd use that as a pretense to just basically screw over all the land, or claim native lands. As a lot of it is like because of two-spirit people. That's what they use. So, that was just like this immediate start of colonization. That's when it kind of begins with, from the beginning, and they go all the way up to the late. One of my favorite stories is like the late 1890s. Is in the Crow Res. They were kind of left alone after the Indian Wars, but they were just kind of left alone to their own culture and everything, because they were allies with Custer and stuff. But at the same time, there's this Indian agent. He saw these Bada people. There were two-spirit crows, and they said, what the F, And he didn't like that. He threw them all in jail, cut their hair off, and had them out there like doing man's labor and stuff. And then the Crow people were just like outraged by this. I mean, this guy's name was finds them and kills them. With a name like that in the warrior culture, they're a badass person. Why the fuck they doing this to finds them and kills them? So the chief comes all the way across the res. He was like they're ready to have an uprising, saying, you get this agent out of here. You don't treat these people like this. And it was just like, and they actually got the agent out of there, which is unheard of in the 1890s, considered the power level stuff. But they were ready to do it, all to stand up for these Bada two-spirit people. But it was just like, it was an elder who died a couple of years ago, and he was like one of the first people that really accepted me right when I came out and I was feeling this awkward stage. He was a Crow elder, and he's like, I'm glad you mentioned that story, but here's how it is like he had this religion from the sands of the Middle East, go across Europe, all the way across the ocean, and all the way across North America, smack dab in the middle of rural Montana. And you're telling them, this is wrong. This is what you've known for thousands of years, but it's wrong. Because of this book over there said that. It just didn't click in their head. It's like, no, this is how they are. There's nothing wrong with them. But, of course, colonization just kind of drilled it out of them. They taught two-spirit people to be ostracized by the kids. In the boarding schools, there's just one quick story of this Nodlehe kid, trans kid, went to and they were very honored, and their parents were just proud they had this, but she went to the boarding school, the Carlisle, and all the other kids knew they were trans kid, but that was their little secret. like we're protecting this kid. It was like their little act of defiance. I could tell. It's like a 7, 8 year old kid. This woman's telling this story. That was her cousin. She was like 7 or 8, along her best cousin and stuff. But one day they had a lice outbreak. They strip all the kids and scrub them down and everything. They found out the kid was biologically male, and they just like made this big fuss and just got mad at everyone, took the kid away. And the woman's like telling this story like 50 years later, and she's just like mad and visibly upset. They're like, I never saw my cousin again. They just took, and it was just like literally putting the fear of the white man's God of them. This is wrong. We will disappear you. There's like graveyards out in front of Carlisle, so you can imagine, unfortunately. So, and little kids like were just like terrified. Yeah, you don't do that. So, yeah. Sorry, such a grim story, but.
For a couple questions, if there are any in the audience.
We're very thorough. We know that.
Yeah.
I just want I want Tate to talk about how accepting yourself influenced your writing. You might have mentioned that before, but
Oh, I don't know how to answer that, but I do want to end with something on a more practical note about Two Spirits. First and foremost, Two Spirit is indigenous only. It's not an identity for anyone who's not indigenous to claim. And not all queer natives are Two Spirit. And not all Two Spirits have an English version of a queer title, right? That's something I think gets convoluted in the conversation. Like, oh, you're gay, you're obviously Two Spirit. Raven mentioned role responsibility. The more I learn about myself and my identity within Two Spiritness, it is a responsibility. I'm held accountable by my community. I'm not given Wian Witko as a name because it's a box to check, right? This is lifelong commitment that I'll work towards forever. And so just FYI, I'm on Twitter all the time fighting white people to say, oh, I just love it. I think I'm Two-Spirit. I'm like, no, you're not. You can't have that too. And so, and every culture has some semblance of this, and it's important to go back to your roots and find that. So, bye.
okay. One of my greatest inspirations is the Custer Battlefield. And there's like they put up some headstones recently honoring Cheyenne warriors. It says one of his name's Limberhand. It's like died fighting for the Cheyenne way of life. So that means they died fighting for me. And I always have to like, because Himane people like, recently there's like they found these pictures. Raven probably saw them, but they're showing the aftermath of the Custer Battlefield, and they're showing all these Himanes, 4 of them they had, leading the victory dance ceremony. And it was just like such distinctive proof that we exist. In this ledger art of, there was like any major ceremonies like victory dances or great victories. It was people like me who like led the ceremonies and stuff. And and it's like so sad that a lot of people in my own tribe don't like, so I'm basically an evangelical trends, I guess, always preaching the trans gospel of two-spiritness and stuff. So anyways, if you want to close with something.
Okay, let me. I was going to continue with the death thing, right? And it had a little bit to do with Winkte, right? This young Winkte boy was up at Fort Peck, and because of like our language for a lot of people, it's becoming revitalized, and sometimes they use it not necessarily in a good way. And this young boy was being called Winkte because he was very feminine, and so he really felt bad. He didn't necessarily know what this word meant. And so he went to one of the counselors who happened to be a two-spirit person by the name of Del First and had asked him, he said, they keep calling me this word. And, my understanding is that it means faggot. And he said, no, that word actually, it's a small part of a larger word. Winkte means those people that pray to the above people for those of us that are here. Because we are the ones that go between the male and the female, between heaven and earth, between life and death. And so for a lot of, there was a lot of taboo around death. There was so much mystery around it that there were some tribes where it was the two-spirit people who would prepare those ones for their burial, because they were that connection between life and death, between the earth and the spirit world. And so they were able to prepare the dead. So when you were talking about that, Adrian, that's what it reminded me of, was the fact that they were probably going out there to gather those that had passed, that were Cheyenne, to prepare them for their journey. And so that was one of the things that Two-Spirit people had done. They used to also, because the Two-Spirit ones that lived as female, they didn't necessarily menstruate. And for a lot of warriors, they were afraid of that power, because women had the ability to create, and it was very powerful. And sometimes it would, the men's fear was it would mess with their medicine if they said, they were going to go out and they were going to, win this battle. And they had somebody who was caring for their camp as they were traveling on a war party. They were afraid that was going to, okay. And so, so that's kind of one of the things that as far as the roles go. So, if you ever get a chance there's a new book called Reclaiming Two-Spirit People that's coming out by Gregory Smithers. I got a chance to write the introduction for it because of the work that I've done in the Two-Spirit community, and the people that I know that had got a chance to contribute to that book. So, Reclaiming Two-Spirit People. If you get a chance, pick it up.
So thanks to Tate Walker, Adrian, Jawort, and Raven Heavy Runner.
I was so happy to get these two authors here with us. They're very, very, I just want to say they're badasses. And they're pretty good highlights of this festival right here. This is the Rebecca Roanhorse. I'm such a stan of Rebecca that I actually wrote this 3,500 word essay regarding her work in LA Review of Books. So, and then there's David Weiden, yeah. And this book has been a phenomenal book. A big takeoff, Winter Counts. So I was just going to have them introduce themselves. So.
I'm Peji Washte. Amachi David Heska, Wanbli, Weiden. It's a pleasure to be here. Am I coming in okay? Does that sound coming in? Okay. What a joy it is to be here, especially with my friend Rebecca Roanhorse, whom I saw just a few months ago in Boulder. That was at the launch party. The launch party for her wonderful new book. So what a pleasure it is. So. Thank you all. Thank you to Sterling. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, the staff. Thank you, everybody that's contributed. This is a really important event, and it's a wonderful, historic in many ways event. And so to be a part of it really means a lot. So I am an enrolled citizen of the Sichangu Lakota Nation, and I'm really happy to be here because I literally just got off the plane last night at midnight. I spent a week teaching at the Sewanee Writers Conference in hot Tennessee. And I am not used to that sort of heat and humidity. So to be back out here in the West where I belong, it's hot, but it's dry. And so I am really thrilled to be here. And I see a lot of my IA students. So I recently was a visiting writer at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and so happy that they made the journey from New Mexico. Yeah, how about shout out to So it is again, just a pleasure. I'll tell you just a quick bit about myself, and then I'll turn it over to my esteemed colleague here. So I am the author of Winter Counts, which came out just about 2 years ago from Echo HarperCollins. And I am told that I am the second person ever to be the second Native person ever to be nominated for the Edgar Award, which is in our field the highest you can get. And I'm the first Native person ever to win the Anthony, the Thriller, other awards. But what means the most to me is not the awards, but I've heard from so many Native people. One Native Lakota woman sent me a video of herself crying, saying, finally, I see myself seen in this book. I am seen. And that meant a lot. But the second thing that I'm really pleased about is the national discussion that Winter Counts has engendered across the nation. And I think we'll touch back on this today. This is a panel on thrillers and speculative fiction. But in a sense, it's a panel about genre literature and the role of genre literature in Native American fiction today. And I'll submit to you that genre literature can have an important role, which is that in many ways, genre literature is the new social novel of our times. And so Winter Counts has, it deals, if you haven't read it, it deals with the broken criminal justice system on reservations. There's a law called the Major Crimes Act, which says that on Native American sovereign nations, when a felony crime occurs, even if the perpetrator is apprehended, Native nations do not have the authority to prosecute these crimes on their own. Instead, they must hand that over to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's offices. But the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's offices are declining to prosecute about 40%. By their own reckoning, by their own numbers, they are declining to prosecute about 40% of all felony crimes that occur on reservations. So these wrongdoers are set free. This is contributing to the problem of missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's contributing to just the general lawlessness and poor quality of life that we see on some reservations, my own included. And I am really thrilled that I've heard from a U.S. attorney. I've heard from several congressional staffers who've told me that they weren't aware of this, and they've been talking with their representatives in the U.S. Congress about possibly doing an amendment to the Major Crimes Act and the Tribal Law and Order Act. And even the dean of the South Dakota Law School recently published a law review article. We're both lawyers, so we know these academic turgid articles. But the dean of the South Dakota Law School published a law review article discussing this book, stating that I indeed got the legal issues correct and calling for a change in the laws. So this is, thank you. I got one person applauding for it, so, and more, thank you. So let me wrap this up because I want to hand it over to Rebecca. But my point here today is that genre literature, we want to tell great stories. We want people to be up all night reading. It's like, what's going to happen? But there's another role as well. That's to educate and maybe to start a dialogue and maybe spark some change. So with that, let me turn it over to my friend Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Roanhorse. Am I on? Yeah? Okay. Right. So I'm a science fiction and fantasy author, hanging out with all these literary folks, representing genre. But, I think some of the things that I care about really are representation. I grew up reading a lot of science fiction and fantasy, things like Game of Thrones, for the fantasy nerds out there, the Belgariad, Tolkien's work. And I never saw any Native characters or Black characters in those works. And so when I came to a point where I wanted to tell stories, I wanted to see my favorite genre populated by people like me. I'm Northern Pueblo on my mother's side, and I'm Black on my father's side. I'm also an adoptee. So I had all these sort of worlds in my head that I wanted to bring to the page. And so that's really sort of been my goal. And, and just like David, I haven't had people send me videos of them crying after reading my work, which might not work the same way for my stuff. But I have gotten tons of emails. I've gotten people coming up to me and telling me that this is the first time they've seen themselves in science fiction and fantasy. I also write for Marvel. I write Marvel Comics, and I write for Marvel TV. I also write for Star Wars. And yes, I sneak some natives into a galaxy far, far away. And it's the first time for a lot of young people that they feel like they belong. And for me, that's super important. It's super exciting that you can see yourself as a superhero in the pages of Marvel. And, your superheroes hanging out on the res, or they're eating the same foods that you do, or they're doing the things that your family does. And so that's really, hopefully, I guess, what I'm trying to do working in genre. Plus, I'm just telling the stories that I want to read, that I never had when I was a kid. And so I've written books like Black Sun, which is for sale over there, also available in your library, I'm sure, which is a big epic fantasy, Mesoamerican inspired pre-Columbian worlds of stargazers and matriarchies and city-states to rival, I would hope, anything that you might see in Game of Thrones or in Tolkien's work, but set here in the Americas, populated by indigenous peoples, fantasy indigenous peoples, and yeah, that's kind of what I do.
So do you guys want to read right now or just do some questions and then read?
We can read.
Okay. So I guess we'll just go back to you, Rebecca.
Okay. All right, so I'm actually going to read from my short story. I also write short stories.
Can everyone hear Rebecca good?
Mic okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Is that a hint to move the mic closer?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my bad. So I'm actually going to read from my short story. This was the first short story actually that I ever wrote, and it was published, and it won a bunch of science fiction and fantasy awards, the Hugo, the Nebula. If you are a sci-fi nerd, then that means something to you. If you are not, that is fine. Nobody cares. And it has actually been optioned by Amazon Studios, and Sterling Harjo of Reservation Dogs is writing the script. So I'm pretty excited about that. But you only have me today, and I'm just going to read it to you. It's called Welcome to Your Authentic Indian Experience, trademark. In the great American Indian novel, when it is finally written, all of the white people will be Indians, and all of the Indians will be ghosts. From Sherman Alexie, How to Write the Great American Indian Novel. You maintain a menu of a half dozen experiences on your digital blackboard, but Vision Quest is the one the tourists choose the most. That certainly makes your workday easy. All a Vision Quest requires is a dash of mystical shaman, a spirit animal, wolf usually, but birds of prey are on the upswing this year, and the approximation of a peyote experience. Tourists always come out of the experience feeling spiritually transformed. You've never actually tried peyote, but you did smoke your share of weed during that 1 year at Arizona State, and who's going to call you on the difference? It's all 101 stuff, really, these quests. But no other Indian working at Sedona Sweats can do it better. Your sales numbers are tops. Your wife, Teresa, doesn't approve of the gig. Oh, she likes you working, especially after that dismal stretch of unemployment the year before last when she almost left you. But she thinks the job itself is demeaning. Our last name's not Trueblood, she complains when you tell her about your nom de rêve. Nobody wants to buy a Vision Quest from a Jesse Turnblatt, you explain. I need to sound more Indian. You are Indian, she says. Turnblatt's Indian sounding enough because you're already Indian. We're not the right kind of Indian, you counter. I mean, we're Catholic, for Christ's sake. What Teresa doesn't understand is that the tourists don't want a real Indian experience. They want what they see in the movies. And who can blame them? Movie Indians are terrific. So you watch the same movies the tourists do until John Dunbar becomes your spirit animal and stands with Fist, your best girl. You memorize Johnny Depp's lines from The Lone Ranger and hang a picture of Iron Ice Cody in your work locker. For a while, you were really into Dustin Hoffman's Little Big Man. It's Little Big Man that does you in. For a week in June, you convince your boss to offer a Custer's Last Stand special, thinking there might be a tourist or two who want to live out a crazy horse experience. You even memorize some quotes attributed to the Venerable Sioux chief that you find on the internet. You plan to make it real authentic. But you don't get a single taker. Your numbers nosedive. Management in Phoenix notices, and boss drops it from the blackboard by 4th of July weekend. He yells at you to stop screwing around, accuses you of trying to be an artiste or whatnot. Tourists don't come to Sedona Sweats to live out a goddamn battle, boss says in the break room over lunch one day, especially if the white guy loses. They come here to find themselves. Boss waves his hand in the air in an approximation of something vaguely prayer-like. It's a spiritual experience we're offering, top quality, the fucking best. Daran, your Navajo coworker with the pretty smile and the perfect teeth, snorts loudly. She takes a bite of her sandwich, mutton by the looks of it. Her jaw works, her sharp teeth flash white. She waits until she's finished chewing to say, nothing spiritual about squaw fantasy. Squaw fantasy is Boss's latest idea, his way to get the numbers up and impress management. Daran and a few others have complained about the use of the ugly slur. The inclusion of a sexual fantasy is an experience at all. But Boss is unmoved, especially when the first week's numbers roll in. Biggest seller yet. Boss looks over at you. What do you think? Boss is Pima, with a bushy mustache and a thick head of still dark hair. You admire that about him, virility. Boss makes being a man look easy, makes everything look easy, real, authentic-like. Daran tilts her head, long beaded earrings swinging, and waits. Her painted nails click impatiently against the Formica lunch table. You can smell the onion in her sandwich. Your mouth is dry like the red rock desert you can see outside your window. If you say squaw fantasy is demeaning, Boss will mock you, call you a pussy, or worse. If you say you think it's okay, Daran and her crew will put you on the guys who are assholes list, and you'll deserve it. You sip your water bottle, stalling. Decide that in the wake of the Crazy Horse debacle, the Boss's approval means more than Daran's. And venture, if the tourists like it. Boss slaps the table triumphant. Daran's face twists in disgust. What does Teresa think of that, eh, Jessie? She spits at you. You tell her Boss is thinking of adding Savage Braves to the menu next. He's going to have you in a loincloth and hair down to your ass. See how you like it. Your face heats up, embarrassed. You push away from the table too quickly and the flimsy top teeters. You can hear Boss's shouts of protest as his vending machine lemonade tilts dangerously, and Daran's mocking laugh. But it all comes to your ears through a shroud of thick cotton. You mumble something about getting back to work. The sound of arguing trails you down the hall. You change in the locker room and shuffle down to the pod marked with your name. You unlock the hatch and crawl in. Some people find the pods claustrophobic, but you like the cool metal container, the tight fit. It's comforting. The VR helmet fits snugly on your head, the breathing mask over your nose and mouth. With a shiver of anticipation, you give the pod your experience settings, add the other necessary details to flesh things out. The screen prompts you to pick a tourist connection from a waiting list, but you ignore it, blinking through the option screens until you get to the final confirmation. You brace yourself for the mild nausea that always comes when you relocate in and out of an experience. The first sensation is always smell, sweet grass and wood smoke and the rich loam of the northern plains. Even though it's fake, receptors firing under the coaxing of a machine, you relax into the sense. You grew up in the desert among people who appreciate cedar and pinon and red earth, but there's still something home-like about this prairie place. Or maybe you watch too much TV. You really aren't sure anymore. And I'll stop there. And let me just say, you can find that story online and read the rest of it and find out what happens to poor Jessie at, I think it's Apex Magazine. Thank you.
I've loved that story for a long time, and I'm doubly impressed now. I didn't know that was the first short story you ever wrote. That's impressive. So yeah, I mean that's great. So yeah, I haven't written any short stories in a long time, and so because I've been working in the novel form. But about a year ago, I was asked to write a piece. So my first short story in like I said, a half a decade is called Turning Heart, and I published it in an anthology. And then the conference for which the anthology was to be released at was canceled. And so nobody, and I mean nobody, read this story. But good news, something good happened. I just about a month or two ago, the story has been selected for the Best American Mystery and Suspense Stories 2022. And so finally, thank you. It's called Turning Heart, and it's edited by Jess Walter, and will be out in November. So I'm glad that somebody will get a chance to read this. But I didn't know we were going to read today, so I didn't bring any short stories. In fact, I had to go downstairs to the library to get a copy of my own book. So, and somebody said it's on hold, so I'd be sure and bring it back. Okay, so I will. But I do enjoy the short form. I have another story coming out here in an anthology called Never Whistle at Night, and Mr. Shane Hawk is right here. That is the editor of an anthology that a lot of people in this room are contributing to. So you want to keep your eyes. When is that coming out? 2023 or 24? Next fall. Okay. So you want to keep your eyes out on that one. And there's other cool stuff happening in the short form. But let me read just a little bit from Winter Counts. So to set this up, if you haven't read it, as I explained during my introduction, the criminal justice system is broken on reservations because of this law called the Major Crimes Act. And because the U.S. government will not prosecute to an adequate degree felony crimes, what has happened is hired vigilantes have sprung up on many reservations. Somebody that you can hire to lay down a beating. If somebody hurts your wife or your sister or your cousin, and the U.S. government won't do anything about it, you can see the temptation to hire somebody that will go out and enact some street justice. And that's what Virgil Wounded Horse does. His fee is $100 for each black eye, each broken bone, and each tooth he knocks out. So they do, I'm asked this question a lot, do these people really exist? And the answer to that is yes. So we are in the head of Virgil Wounded Horse here. Virgil Wounded Horse, though, is he's the hero of the book. He's a complicated character. He also he's the legal guardian for his 14-year-old nephew, Nathan. And so it's a family story. It's a crime story. There's a lot going on in the book. In this scene, I'll read a short scene. Virgil has been asked to he's been offered a job to stop heroin from coming onto the Rosebud Reservation, and he declines. He goes to a sweat lodge. He comes back home, and he's checking on his 14-year-old nephew, Nathan. And so that's where we are. Virgil Wounded Horse has come home and wants to check on his nephew. I'd had enough for the night, so I went to go check on Nathan. I could see that his lights were on, so I turned everything off and covered him with a blanket. I opened the door and saw that he was passed out on the bed, all of his clothes still on, one arm hanging down at his side. Dude, why don't you get into your shorts and get under the covers? He didn't respond. Nathan, let's go to bed. I'm tired. Still no response. Nathan? I looked at him closely. His face and lips were gray, almost blue. I saw an empty balloon, a lighter, and some crumpled, burned foil on the floor. There was an acrid vinegar odor in the air. Oh no. Nathan, wake up, get up. I tried to sit him up, but he was too heavy, and he fell back onto the bed. I pulled his eyelids up. His pupils were tiny and dark, like miniature black holes, and his skin felt cold and clammy. I slapped his face hard. Nathan, open your eyes, wake up. No response, but I saw his chin move just a little. I ran to the living room for my cell phone. The IHS hospital was 50 miles from here, and the tribal police station about 20. The tribal cops were my only hope. My hand shaking, I dialed the number. Police. This is Virgil Wounded Horse. My nephew, he's overdosing. He won't wake up. You need to send, what is your address? Please hurry, he's unconscious. I need your address, sir. He sounded pissed off, like I was stopping him from going home after a long shift. 83 in Spidergrass Road. We're the only house out here. Just stay on the phone with me, okay? Is he breathing? I think so, yeah, but not much. Just stay on the phone. Stay on the phone, all right? Just hurry. How old is he? He's 14. He's only 14. I flashed back to Nathan as a little kid, playing with some toy car I had given him. What difference did it make how old he was if he was overdosing? How long has he been down? I don't know, I just found him. Do you have a car free? The dispatcher sounded angry again. We're on the way. You said it was an overdose? Heroin, I think. There was a balloon and some foil on the floor. Do you know how much of the drug he took? How the fuck should I know? I didn't know he was doing that shit. Just trying to help. How much does he weigh? I don't, maybe 140? We'll be there soon. Just stay with me, okay? Can you stay on the line? Sir? I let the phone drop to the floor. Black clouds entered the room, taking up all the oxygen, all of the air. I couldn't breathe, so I let the darkness envelop my lungs, my skin, my body. Sir? Sir? I heard the voice on the phone from far away. Are you still there? I picked up the phone. Yeah, I'm here. How close are they? Do you know how to do CPR, he said. Kind of. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? Not exactly. I need you to start doing chest compressions right away. Do you remember that movie, Saturday Night Fever? Movie? What are you talking about? I need you to put both hands on his chest, right on top of his heart, and press down hard. Do 100 compressions a minute. Think of the disco beat from that song, Stayin' Alive. The song from the movie. Use that beat on his chest. Now put the phone down and do it. Keep doing it until they get there. I pulled up Nathan's sweatshirt. His skin wasn't brown anymore. It was a strange shade of gray and weirdly cold and damp. I clasped my hands together like I was praying, and I put them right over his heart. I'd always hated disco music, but my mother had played that old Bee Gees album constantly when I was a kid. I couldn't remember the lyrics, but the beat of the song came back to me instantly. I pushed down on Nathan's chest steadily, like I was dancing at a 49 party. Was I pressing too hard? Did I need to push harder? I focused on the beat of the music as I forced his heart to pump blood through his veins. And as I pushed, I tried to remember the Indian prayers my mother used to say to me. I'd heard them so many times as a kid, and it seemed urgent that I remember just one line, but nothing would come. How was it I could remember some shitty disco song from years ago, but I couldn't remember my mother's own words? The weight of my failures, all of them, felt like a shroud wrapped around me. And as my nephew lay dying in the little house, I sent my words up to the Creator. Please don't let this child die. I will do anything. Just spare him. Spare him. I'll read one just a couple of paragraphs, because I think in this audience, I especially want to read this very, very short bit here. In this little instance here, this section, Virgil is in the hospital room waiting to find out if Nathan will live or die. Hours passed while I waited for Nathan to wake up. I tried to stop my mind from going to dark places, but images of my nephew, his brain damage, crowded into my head. I was proud of him, his intelligence and his curiosity and his fierce defense of music I hated. It was breaking my heart and spirit to imagine that these parts of him might be gone for good. And then I started to obsess over things Nathan had done that might have tipped me off to hard drug use. Had he been acting strangely? Maybe I should have searched his backpack and phone. I gave up trying to stop this parade of images, and I just sat there with my fear and my guilt. The window in the hospital room was murky, like it hadn't been washed in years. But I could still glimpse the russet hills and rolling prairie of the reservation outside in the dying light. Back in the time before Columbus, there were only Indians here. No skyscrapers, no automobiles, no streets. Of course, we didn't use the words Indian or Native American then. We were just people. We didn't know we were supposedly drunks or lazy or savages. I wondered what it was like to live without that weight on your shoulders, the weight of the murdered ancestors, the stolen land, the abused children, the burden every Native person carries. We were told in movies and books that Indians had a sacred relationship with the land, that we worshiped and nurtured it. But staring at Nathan, I didn't feel any mystical bond with the res. I hated our shitty unpaved roads and our falling down houses and the snarling packs of dogs that roamed freely in the streets and alleys. But most of all, I hated that kids like Nathan, good kids, decent kids, got involved with drugs and crime and gangs because there was nothing for them to do here. No after-school jobs, no clubs, no tennis lessons. Every month in the Lakota Times newspaper, there was an obituary for another teen suicide, another family in the Burn-Thai Nation who'd had their heart taken away from them. In the old days, the Ayapaha was the town crier, the person who would meet incoming warriors after a battle, ask them what happened so they wouldn't have to speak of their own glories, and then tell the people the news. Now, the Ayapaha, our local newspaper, announced losses and harms too often, victories and triumphs too rarely. Why didn't I leave? People here always talked about going to Rapid City or Sioux Falls or Denver, getting a job and making a clean break, putting aside native ways and assimilating, adapting to suburban life. But I thought about the sound of the drummers at a powwow, the smell of wild sage, the way little native kids looked, dressed up in their first regalia, the flash of the sun coming up over the hills. And I wondered if I could ever really leave the reservation because the res was in my mind, a virtual res, one that I was seemingly stuck with. And then I fell into a half sleep, immersed in fugue dreams and transient thoughts, images of Indian children dancing in my head. Thank you.
Yeah, I've never heard David do a reading. I was like, so exciting. He's so animated and stuff. So it's like, okay, I guess since we're on the subject of short stories, right before that, I want to go back to this. Have you discussed that story you wrote a little bit? Okay, I'll just read the question. Rebecca, well, you're predominantly known as a science and speculative fiction writer, which we will get more to in a minute. After initially writing what you told the New York Times were, quote, Tolkien knockoffs about white farm boys going on journeys, unquote. I just wanted to say that. Did writing that short story, Welcome to Your Authentic Indian Experience, like help you feel more comfortable about writing about the world around you?
Yeah, so, gosh, I'm trying to think. So I wrote that in 2017. It's still kind of like one of my favorites. I've written a number of short stories since then. You know, I think, gosh, did it make me feel more comfortable with the world around me? No. I think I've always been, a bit of an outsider. And that's, I think, what appeals to me about that story, about the character Jesse. He feels there's a certain way to be Indian, that you have to do certain things or act a certain way or, portray a certain dignity or, whatever the stereotype is. And he doesn't fit that. But the irony, of course, in the story is that he is the most Indian person in the story because he is Indian by just being Indian. And I think that's really what appeals to me, being an adoptee, being raised in a white family. I didn't get to grow up in my culture. I reunited with my mother and her family as an adult, but it is a very complicated, very fraught relationship. This is probably TMI, but I was a secret baby. No one knew that she had a baby. She was a teenager. My dad was black. This was the 1970s. It just was not done. And so me, sort of coming into an adult, reuniting with that family, starting to understand a little bit more about who I was as a Native woman, has been a challenge, has been something that has not always come easy to me. And so, yeah, I guess writing that story in that sense allowed me to explore a character who had some of the same feelings that I had. And you'll see throughout my work, I'm always writing characters who are outsiders in some ways, who don't fit in, who aren't accepted for who they are, and are really struggling, especially with the ideas of community and responsibility and all of those sort of things that come with being a Native woman, and often failing. And certainly I have failed, but hopefully I have triumphed as well. And so, I don't know if that was way too much information for the question you asked, but that's just sort of an insight into my work, why I wrote that story in particular, and think why I write most of the stories that I do write.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I'm one of those TMI people. I just ramble off about, Wait, what was the question? I've literally done that. Anyways, so to short stories. Okay, my quick short stories. I saw, what was that? In June, I saw David randomly in Great Falls. Sterling texts his picture saying, hey, David's in Great Falls. he must be at the mermaid bar. There's like this bar with mermaids there. He took Facebook. I was like, really? And I just so happened to be. I was getting an LGBTQ Activism of the Year award, and then so David, I guess, was just not far from me, and he's like, you better go check him out. And he had no idea I was there. And then he just like sitting at the bar staring at this mermaid, and this person like right next to him, just a local guy. So what do you do? And he's like, oh, I'm just a writer. And then I was just like right there. It's like, oh, he's being humble. He's like a best-selling author. It's like really bragging him up and everything. And then he's like, oh my God, it's like totally unexpecting to see me. So, but yeah, and there was just something about our cultures too, just being like really humble about it and everything. But and he even told me like, oh, I was just winning some award for a short story, but I was like, it's the freaking Spur Award, which is a big deal for short stories, which I do want you to talk about. But he also talked me up as this like Chris Kattan from Saturday Night Live, the Night at the Roxbury person. He was there. Then he's like, oh, you got to get a picture with him. Then he goes up, this is Adrian, they're Activist of the Year Award. So we're just like talking each other up. But when it comes to ourselves, being Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, we're very humble. Very but I don't yeah, it was like something about so it's like we're Native Americans, we're humble, but it was like, but have you ever met a Blackfeet or Crow person? So anyways, so tell us about that that your short story, the one you wrote.
Well, I'd be happy to. What she's saying is exactly correct. Is it was so deeply strange because I was in Great Falls, Montana, that I'd never been to receive the Spur Award for Best Short Story of the Year for my story Skin, which appears in the volume Midnight Hour. And yeah, so there's this really cool. I think it's called the Sip and Dip. There's a really cool bar. Yeah, and I'm like, wait, what? I'd never seen anything. What's it called? Did I get it wrong? Yeah. What's it called? Sip and Dip? Okay, I'm not. I can't remember what it was. There's Slip and Bite, or I don't even know. But it's a cool bar, like this '70s throwback, and they have these pools of water and women that can hold their breath for like 5 or 10 minutes down there. It's strange, and so I'm just sitting there, and then here's Chris Kattan of Saturday Night Live. Weirdly enough, and then out of nowhere, here's my friend. I had no idea. So it was just a strange night all the way around, But I guess that's what you get at the. I'm not going to try and mangle the name of the bar again, but I loved it. It's maybe my favorite bar in the USA. So I love Montana. It's great. I mean, this is my first time in Missoula. Look at this. How beautiful is this? It's fantastic. So let me just say a little bit about the story Skin. So Skin is another Virgil Wounded Horse story. Virgil is hired by his attorney to go steal a book. But Virgil's like, I'm not a thief. I'll beat people up, but I'm not a thief, okay? And he's like, look, I really need you to do this, okay? Just get the book, And he's like, what's so important about this book? Is you got a collector or something? And Virgil says, well, or his boss says, no, just save the cover, and then you can get rid of the book. What's up with the cover? The book is bound in the skin of a murdered Native person. So 150 years ago, an indigenous person was murdered, and they took his flesh off, tanned and flayed it, and bound a book in it. And so Virgil, in fact, goes to a theological seminary school, which I made up in Rapid City, and the book was, in the story, is prominently displayed in the trophy case. Now, if you haven't guessed, this is based on a real incident. The Iliff Theological Seminary in my hometown of Denver, Colorado, for over 100 years, prominently displayed a book called The History of Christianity, which in fact was bound in the skin of a murdered Native man. This is a very true story. So I wanted to fictionalize this. Now, Tink Tinker, who's another Native activist, he wrote about it, if you know Tink, and others. The book was removed finally, and the skin was returned to the Lakota people where it was properly buried. But that a seminary would proudly show this, display this book, it says a lot about the way natives are viewed in this country. And so I wanted to write that story and bring, again, another true injustice to light. And so, again, I was really honored to receive the award for the best short story. But check it out. It's called Midnight Hour, and also many, many other really cool stories in there as well, all by authors of color.
Okay, I'm just gonna skip ahead. I don't know, it doesn't even matter to you guys, but to my questions, it was about something about research, and that brought up something. I have this friend, Patricia. She's gonna be so happy I mentioned her, but she's like a huge Rebecca Roanhorse stan. I was like, oh, so you read her? Yeah, I read all of her work, but she couldn't make it here today, unfortunately. But what she does, she's like a book editor for Oklahoma University Press, and so does a lot of nonfiction historical books. And I said, so what? So what do you want? Is there any question you want to ask Rebecca? And just her having that background, what she was just like, how what is the research process for like particularly book Black Sun? Because that is just an impressive amount of research you must have put into there. So yeah, can you talk a little about that?
Sure. Yes, I want to talk about the research because I loved what Louise Erdrich said last night. If you went to her talk, that a lot of people think, oh, Native writers, they just put their experience on the page. They don't do research. You know, it just magically comes to you, I guess. But actually, to be a writer, like to be a good writer, especially I think to be a fantasy writer, you have to do a ton of research. Because even though it's fantasy, there's always some line that the reader won't cross with you. Like, you know, you can believe in like flying dragons and things like that, but you can't quite believe that like a woman was like in charge, you know, or something like that. So you need to back that all up, you know, with your research. So, as I said before, Black Sun is inspired by the pre-Columbian cultures of the Americas, everyone from the Maya to the Incans, to the ancestral Puebloans, to the mound builders of Cahokia. And so I started my research there. I've always been interested in pre-Columbian cultures, particularly Mesoamerican cultures. So that's a lifetime of research, especially the last 20 years. I read anything I could get my hands on. But then I specifically started to look into the cultures of the ancestral Puebloans of Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde, and their religious and political structures, the way that they structured sort of the power dynamics in their culture. And then, for example, there is a sailing culture in this book. I'd actually started with a woman. I knew I wanted her to be a sailor. I wanted her to be sort of brash and outspoken. She's actually an outcast from her culture, unsurprising for me, but she's also bisexual. She's fairly like promiscuous and out there, very much a DGAF kind of woman. But I wanted her to be sort of based in Maya, her culture to be inspired by the Maya. And so I didn't want European sailing methods. I didn't want European ships. I wanted ships that seemed true and sailing methods that seemed true to indigenous cultures. So I did a deep dive into the maritime Maya. And a lot of people don't know that, like, I mean, if you think about it, it makes so much sense. Of course, the Maya were incredible sailors. I mean, there's what we call the Gulf of Mexico, like right there. And you know, we talk about how, you know, oh, you know, Indians didn't have the wheel, blah, 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 blah. Well, yes, they had the wheel, but they had waterways. Like, why would you roll your, like, shit up the mountain out there when you could, like, be on the river? And so, you know, that was the sort of stuff that, you know, I wanted to deep dive into. I wanted to bring to this fantasy story. So it's entertaining, it's exciting, hopefully, but it's also there, hopefully, to give people a little bit of an insight into, hey, you know, I wonder what really was going on. Like, yeah, I talk a lot. Actually, in the back, I'm gonna skip around. I do give a little list of. Somewhere. I haven't looked at the paperback version. I'm all, oh, I thought it was in here. It is. It's just way up here. If you're interested in pre-Columbian cultures, I do give a little list of some of the recommended reading that really inspired me. Not just historical reading, but I did a lot of reading. There's a book called Scattering of Jades, Stories, Poems, and Prayers of the Aztecs, where they're in translation, of course, but it's words, their own words. It's not just people writing about them. And so that was very inspiring. There's books on the Chaco Meridian, 1,000 Years of Political and Religious Power in the Ancient Southwest. There's a real awesome visual book called Envisioning Cahokia, A Landscape Perspective. And so things like that, that's the sort of research that I did, that I hope people read this. They say, yes, this is a fantasy world. Clearly, this is all fake. But I would love to know about the real thing. Maybe I can check out these books Rebecca recommended and learn something about the cultures of the Americas that often get overlooked. We forget that there were these ancient civilizations that were just as advanced as anything coming out of Europe or coming out of Africa, Egypt, places like that, right here under our own feet. They don't get the respect that I think that they deserve and that they should. All our kids should be learning about in school. These should be like our national treasures, and it's like we barely even know about them. So yes, I write fantasy, but hopefully it'll inspire you to learn something about the real thing. Is that it?
Yeah, thank you. That reminds me of you did a recommendations. I was just like doing more research on you or something, then it said something about music recommendations of yeah, and I was like, what's that about? It was like music that you listen to while writing. So we'll have you both answer that one. So, but that was, I don't know, it seemed like a fun question. So.
I do just want to talk a little bit as well about book recommendations, because I think it's one of the surfaces that we can do as authors, which is to kind of turn our readers' heads towards books that might help them. And so in Winter Counts, I do have an author's note, and I do a different sort of research. I do research into the legal and political aspects to make sure that I'm getting it right. Now, it's weird, though, because it's a work of fiction, and so sometimes I've had people come up to me, fans have been like, well, this is slightly wrong. It's like, well, I just make shit up, okay? So, on the other hand, though, I do feel a duty to be reasonably accurate in some of the things that I describe. But I do just want to point out here that in the author's note, I point out a lot of books that people can turn to if they want to learn more about Lakota culture. I don't need to go through all of them, but a great one is Life's Journey, Oral Teachings from Rosebud by Albert Whitehead Sr. That's the book I probably recommend more than anything. If people want to learn about our culture and our spirituality, that's a really solid one to turn to. As far as music, I love this question because I never get asked about this. I do have a playlist on Spotify. There's a blog out there called Large Hearted Boy where, are you on that, Brandon? Did you do a playlist? Okay. So writers, if you, when you put a new book out, David Gudkowski will ask you if you want to put together a playlist, and then he does a blog post on your book. So you can track it down. It's a couple of years old for me, but I did a playlist, not of stuff that I listen to when I write, but what my characters would listen to. And so Virgil Wounded Horse is a heavy metal guy. Now, I am not so much. I had to do a pretty deep dive into this to figure out, and then Nathan likes rap and hip hop. And so I on the playlist, I've got Frank Waln, who's a great Sichangu Lakota rapper. Oh, okay, I see some heads nodding. Okay, right on. And so the closest to me is to my musical taste is the character Marie. And so in the book initially, I first had her listening to boy bands like NSYNC and all that, and it just didn't feel right. And so like the final draft is just about to go to the printers, and I rewrote it, and I turned her into a goth, and so she liked. So in the book, I mentioned that she listened to Susie and the Banshees, Joy Division, Bauhaus. Now, I realize that I'm really dating myself here because many of the young people are like, is that like these Rolling Stones or these Beatles? I've heard of them, but I don't know exactly what they are. So kids, check out Susie and the Banshees and Joy Division. And so that's what indeed Marie listens to. So I had so much fun creating that playlist.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm going to try that. That's very cool. So I create a playlist for every new novel that I write. I try to go through and I pick songs that I'm not familiar with. Like once someone who's cooler than me gave me some shit about using Spotify's recommendation thing. They were like, that's not cool. And I was like, well, I'm old and I'm not cool. So I'm going to use that. But I try to set a mood. And so often I'm looking for songs that remind me of either the characters in the book or the overall feeling of the book. I put that playlist together, and it becomes sort of Pavlovian for me because, at least pre-COVID, I was traveling a lot. I also have a husband and a teenager who don't understand what a closed door is, who are constantly interrupting me because I must not be doing anything important in there. I use the playlist to sort of get into the story very quickly. So it becomes this thing where, hey, I can put on my headphones, the songs kick in, and I'm there. I'm in that world. I'm with those characters, and it allows me to start writing without sort of the build-up, because you can't really be a dilettante about it. I know a lot of people are like, I have to have my special candle, and then I have to have my coffee, and I'm like, all I need is my headphones and a laptop, and I will get work done. So yeah, and that's kind of how I use it. If you listen to it enough times, the lyrics start to blur, and the music becomes background, and then it just sort of feeds into the mood of like what I'm doing.
Oh, that was a fun question. But anyways, okay, I guess we're required by copyright or something, trademark, to ask about James Welch. No, just kidding. But beyond James Welch, who are some of the writers or people that interested you, as in made you like want to start doing it? Like, I have to be a writer, Or do you have any stories about James Welch's influence on your writing? Have you go?
Okay, sure. Well, James Welch is a deeply important writer to me. I've told this story on interviews a number of times, but I believe the first native authored book that I ever read was Winter in the Blood. I can't remember exactly when it was. It might have been high school, it might have been early college, but I just had never, for some reason, picked up a native authored book until Winter in the Blood, and it really just my head exploded, because it sounds really stupid now, but I didn't quite understand that we can tell our own stories. I just didn't think that we had the right to, and I know that just sounds ridiculous, but it's what I felt. And then I read this, and I didn't like the book at first. It was disturbing to me. It was strange, but I've returned to it over and over throughout the years, and I get it. I take a different reading of it, every time that I read it. And I believe Brandon Hobson and I, we did with who was it? Daniel Geller. We did a tribute at the LA Book Festival to James Welch last year. So we talked about all of our favorite books, and I was able to choose my favorite of his, Winter, which is in fact Winter in the Blood. So his works mean so much to me. I mean everything to me, and that's why it is just deeply my honor to be here.
Yeah, so I write science fiction and fantasy. I'm not a very lit-oriented person, and I am not formally educated in writing or literature. I'm a self-taught writer, but I am formally educated. So James Welch is new to me, and actually that's kind of exciting. Because of this conference, I get to discover a brand new writer, and I've already got Winter in the Blood on my phone. I plan to read it on the plane home tomorrow, and so, yeah. That's kind of my story. As far as who influences me, well, I kind of already said, all the nerds, all the science fiction and fantasy writers, absolutely. But I do want to shout out, kind of like what David was saying, I didn't realize I could be a science fiction fantasy writer. I was a woman of color, and I thought science fiction and fantasy was for white dudes. And certainly if you're writing it, right? And so it took people like N.K. Jemisin, who is a 3-time in a row Hugo Award winner, people like Nnedi Okorafor, and these are all black women science fiction and fantasy writers, to show me that this was possible. Because, as David said, I was a lawyer actually before, working in Native rights, working mostly on the Navajo Nation, and then for the Attorney General of New Mexico. Doing stuff like that, being entirely unfulfilled, because I was like a mediocre lawyer, not a great one. And so it took seeing other women of color pursuing the creative arts, writing science fiction and fantasy, for me to realize, hey, I can do that too. And so that came later in life. And so actually, I think it's really exciting to see young people already knowing, that they want to write. It's like earlier at the Two-Spirit talk, there were lots of young people, lots of teenagers, and I was like, that is so awesome, because hopefully they're not going to struggle. They're not going to try to be a mediocre lawyer for 10 years before they realize they really want to write like, dudes with magic powers on flying crows.
I want to jump in here because I love Rebecca's humbleness. she's saying mediocre lawyer, mediocre lawyer. Forgive me if I'm wrong. Did you not go to Yale Law School? Okay.
I did not, actually. I went to Yale undergrad.
Yale undergrad. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Where'd you go to law school?
University of New Mexico Law School.
Okay, okay, but Yale University and then University of Mexico, you know, this is an impressive pedigree. I went to Joe's Bar and Grill and Legal Education Institute. You know, that's where I got my law degree. They just tossed it my way. Just, you know, you do enough shots and you get the law degree. So okay, Yale University. So that's some great stuff. You know, I just want to just talk a little bit too, because this is such a unique opportunity. I don't think I answered some of the writers that have influenced me. So within Winter Counts, there's a hidden tribute to two authors. And they're not well, one is especially not well known. Lewis Owens is maybe one of the most important and underappreciated Native writers out there. So Lewis Owens sadly took his own life. But he was, I have argued in print, he's the most important Native crime writer. And in a sense, I owe really my career, such as it is, to him, because he created the form. And I'm trying to perfect the style of Indigenous crime writing that he started. And so within this book, there is, in fact, a hidden tribute to Lewis Owens and to one other crime writer, Jim Thompson. So Jim Thompson is the great noir writer. He's not Native. Now, he's quite well known, but I have a tribute to him as well. So I think a lot of people, if you read crime, you know Jim Thompson. But you may not know Lewis Owens. And so I do urge you to seek out his books. And I'm also happy to tell you about another book that I'm hoping to be able to reissue soon. So I'm now the series editor for the University of New Mexico Press. We have a new imprint called Native Edge. And I guess I'm formally announcing it for the first time here today. Native Edge is a new imprint of UNM, which will only publish Native writers, genre, hybrid, fiction, anything that doesn't fit elsewhere. And we are currently in talks to reissue a really important book called The Indians Won by Martin Cruz Smith. Now, at the time, he was writing under the name Martin Smith. Now, if you know Martin Cruz Smith, if you saw a movie called Gorky Park or read the book, he's known as a crime writer, but he's Native. He's from one of the Pueblos. And this book he wrote when he was just 26 years old out of the University of Pennsylvania. And it's hard to get. It's out of print. And we want to make this our lead title. I shouldn't say too much here because we're currently in talks with his agent. But it's an alternate history. What if Native nations had banded together in the 1800s, banded together and fought the Europeans, and created a nation in the middle of North America called the Indian Nation, is what it's called in the book. And then the USA exists on the two coasts. This could have happened if natives had banded together. And that is a really fascinating, what do they call it, counterfactual history. And it's tough to get right now. I'm telling you, if you can find one, the copies are like $100. But we are hoping, and signs are looking good, to reissue this with a new introduction that I will write. So keep your eyes open for The Indians Won by Martin Smith.
I just have to say I have a copy of that.
You do?
Yes. Yeah. I won't say how much I paid for it, but it was worth it.
Okay, this is a question for myself, just because I'm a Star Wars nerd. So, can you tell the story of how you were able to write a Star Wars book, how that all came together? Now I'm going to fangirl and go, whee!
Sure. Right. So I wrote a book called Resistance Reborn, which is, if you don't know, like Lucasfilm, obviously, like they don't just make movies and TV shows. They also have a very robust publishing arm. And they often write novelizations of the books, or of the movies, and you get so much more in the books than you could get out of like just an hour and a half, 2-hour movie. And then they write books to fill in all the little blanks. So my book, Resistance Reborn, occurs between The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. If this is all just going over your head, just go with it for a little bit. And it focuses on Poe Dameron. And so in the movies, and these are from the last, sort of Star Wars trilogy bunch, they really focus mostly on Rey, and there wasn't a lot of room to develop Poe. He's very sort of one-dimensional. So they were like, we're going to develop Poe, we want him to, sort of have a little backstory, do other things. And there are comic books with Poe and things like that. But they gave it to me to write the book. Gosh, how did it start? Well, so, there's a lot of Native stuff in Star Wars. Everything, obviously, from Princess Leia's hairstyle is inspired by, like, Hopi hairstyles, to the Ewoks, come from the Miwok tribe of California. Of course, when Princess Leia is in her bounty hunter disguise and she goes into Jabba the Hutt's lair in Empire Strikes Back, what does she say? Yate, yate, right? So Navajo for hello, right? I was like, why don't you get someone, who's native to write a Star Wars? And I sort of, said it on Twitter, of course. And people were like, yeah, get someone who's native, write a Star Wars. I wasn't thinking me, because I only had like 1 or 2 books out. And I was like, who writes Star Wars? Not me. I can't write Star Wars. But other authors, other Star Wars authors were like, yeah, you should have Rebecca write a Star Wars. I was like, what? So I started going around on Twitter, yeah, have Rebecca write a Star Wars, have Rebecca write a Star Wars. And then the Lucasfilm editor reached out and says, hey, Rebecca, do you want to write a Star Wars? And I said, oh, my God, no, I'm terrified. But no, after I sort of came down from the non-reality of that, I said, absolutely. I would kill to write a Star Wars. And, of course, it's very intimidating. The universe is huge. But they have people they call the story group, and all they do is live and breathe Star Wars for a job. And so, I reached out to my friend Daniel Older, who wrote a great Han Solo book, and it's written now in the new universe quite a bit. And I said, Daniel, how do I write a Star Wars? The fans will eat me alive, Like, if I get something wrong, they are going to come for me. And he's like, listen, Lucasfilm didn't hire you to write the perfect Star Wars movie. They hired you because they liked your voice, and they want to see what you can bring to the universe. And so what I can bring is I can bring character, I can bring trauma. I can bring like all the like sort of, darkness and doubt, that Poe is going through after he really betrays and gets all his friends murdered. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen The Last Jedi. So I wrote a Star Wars. They gave me 4 months. So if you've written a novel, if you ever tried to write a novel, imagine trying to write a Star Wars novel in 4 months, and you can't be late because the movie's coming out. So I quit my job. I quit my day job as a lawyer, and I wrote a Star Wars.
I got nervous, or anxiety, just 4 months for a novel. I'm like, oh my God. Okay, I want to talk about. So the part you read earlier was is more of a touching part, but the character Virgil is really, really gruff, unabashedly so. So why did you choose to use throughout? I mean, his first person point of view, the whole time, rather than a neutral third person voice. I mean, where was the inspiration of that? Is there any movies or other books that you're yeah? Anyway.
Well, thank you. So Winter Counts is written in first person, which, allows a real intimacy. You're in the character's head. But, writing in first person is tough. My students, I talked to them a little bit about that because you have to keep it fresh. Being in somebody's head for 300 pages is hard. And so I did, in fact, go to HarperCollins, and I said, hey, how about if the sequel to Winter Counts is in third person, and they were like, how about no? How about, how about you recreate the formula that made this into a best-selling book? And so I'm like, well, okay then, But in a way, I leaned into this challenge. So as my IA students can tell you, what I try to do and what I'm trying to teach them is how to use the techniques of literary fiction in a genre book. And so there are a number of techniques that they have heard probably at excruciating detail when I was there just 2 weeks ago. Learning how to kind of mix these techniques and use them. Why did I make Virgil gruff, and how did I do so? Well, Virgil is, he's a hired vigilante, and in the chapter I usually read, it starts off with Virgil pounding someone's nose into his skull, a pedophile. So he's a pedophile that rapes little children, and Virgil literally beats him up and pounds his nose into his skull. That's a tough opening to the book, and so I wanted to humanize him. P.S. I was on a list about a month ago on Bookshop or something, lists of books about winter for kindergartners, and they had this on there, and I'm like, well, I will say I'm very honored that to be listed here, but I will say that the book does open again with a nose being pounded back in the skull, and ends with a cattle prod being inserted in somebody's eye hole and turned on. So maybe, yeah, you guys are like, oh, now I don't want to buy that book. But I'm like, perhaps a 5-year-old might find that a touch, off-putting. So thank you, bookshop.org. but Virgil is I'll keep this short, he understands that being a vigilante is wrong. We should not take the law into our own hands. I'm an attorney as well, and I did practice for a number of years, and I'm a professor of Native American Studies. Vigilantism is not right. But what if the government, doesn't hold up their end of the bargain? What if they're not prosecuting sex crimes and abuse against women? What happens then? So Virgil is aware of these contradictions. And so I tried to build in this moral ambiguity throughout the book, and I hope that comes through in his voice, that he knows what he's doing is wrong, but he also likes the beatings. He likes it. I can tell you in the sequel, he stopped being a vigilante, but he really misses it. He really misses beating the crap out of people. So that theme is going to become even more apparent in the new book, which is titled Wisdom Corner.
Is that the first time you've told us the title of the new book? Yep. Oh, okay. That's the first time I heard it.
Okay, I guess I'm going to see if the audience has any questions. If anyone has a... see, I'm standing up, so I'm ready. Okay, someone right back there. Oh, we can hear you.
I think it's a bit of a disaster. I haven't practiced law for a long time. I especially was federal Indian law and tribal law, but I think I'll let David take it since he's right in the mix.
Well, I don't know about that. Are you talking about the McGirt from 2 years ago or the one that just came down? It's an absolute disaster. So I don't want to get too deeply into the legal woods here, but the new disaster is from the U.S. Supreme Court is possibly the worst decision for Natives in 100 years. It is completely destroying our sovereignty. Didn't you, Nick? Did you do a really good roundtable and hike? Listen, I loved that. So if y'all don't know, let me introduce my friend Nick here, who writes for High Country News, which is really one of the best sources, I think, for Native articles out there. And you did a roundtable with 4 people, and I learned so much from that. Track that down. It is worth your time. But this new disaster from the Supreme Court, it's obviously we have a new Supreme Court on our hands, and it does not bode well for the future. ICWA is coming up. The Indian Child Welfare Act is coming up for review as well. And I'm seeing people shaking their heads and all that. There's a large chance that ICWA is going to be overturned. So it does not bode well. I will leave it at that.
Oh, go ahead.
For both authors, revision, what does it mean to you? How do you go about it?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Okay, the question is revision, just for the camera. So how do they go about it?
Yeah. So I always say the magic happens in the revision. First, you have to have a draft. I think that there would be more writers out there if people could just finish a first draft. It's harder than it sounds because, there's like distractions, there's shiny objects. It's very easy to get bogged down in the middle of your novel and then just never finish, like go on to whatever the next shiny thing is. So you really have to persevere. You have to get that first draft out. But you should always expect your first draft to pretty much be crap. That's just sort of the way it is. And I've heard people say, that first draft is for me. I'm telling the story sort of for me, not for other people to read. And it can often feel that way. And so I probably revise, at least, so my process is I will write, for a day, whatever that is. And in the morning I go back, I revise whatever it is that I wrote, and then I write whatever my next, 5,000 words are for that day. And then I try not to touch it until I'm completely done. Otherwise, I'll just get stuck revising the same thing. Oh, this word could be better here. Oh, let me just look up, what's a great synonym for door? There are none. And so you can get bogged down. So finish your draft. Find the magic in the revisions. I'll often do a revision purely for emotion, or I'll do a revision focused solely on description. I hate description. It's not my thing. But dialogue, I love. So often my dialogue passes are pretty solid, but when I'm describing something, I'm like, there was a hill, they went up it, congratulations. And so I have to go back and I obviously have to fill that in. So I think revision is probably, I'm just going on, but revision is probably the most important thing you can do. And you should expect to do it however many times it takes, 3 or 4 times before I even give it to my editor. And then my editor has revisions. And then I have a writing group. I have like 4 or 5 other published authors who I share my work with. And then, they all give critique. And I revise, of course, you have to figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you in critique, which is also a very important skill to develop. But then I revise again. And then, unfortunately, after you get your book published and you read it, you're like, oh, crap, I wish I could revise this again. Because you find all the errors that, still made it through or things you're not happy with. So it's really, you stop when, if you're on a deadline, they tell you have to turn the book in. But you could keep revising forever.
I'll say, of course, I agree with that. I revised Winter Counts 18 times. So I did a full revision 18 times of this book to get it right. So revision is critical, but I do counsel my students to front load the process as much as possible so as to make revision less painful. Now, I don't want to go through the entire thing. I did an interview with Crime Reads. It's out there maybe 6, 8 months ago where I talk a lot about my process and how I do a lot of the work ahead of time. But I do a lot of research ahead of time into my characters. I really, even if I've worked with them before, I go through, their background, their stories, their musical tastes, and I work out a lot of things ahead of time. My students just heard at IA. I even work out what I call the image patterns, what the image patterns in the book are going to be, what will be the literary allusions that I'll be working in. This time I'm Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I'm doing sort of an homage to Things Fall Apart in the new book. The theme of the book, the theme of your book should come to you like in the second or third draft, and how do you work in the theme? So I front load as much as possible in before I start writing. So that's just my process, but you cannot get away from revisions, and that's just a fact of life for a writer.
Yes, please.
I wanted to know, you both had other careers, that then you transitioned into full-time writing, and I wanted to know what that transition was like for each of you.
Okay, the question was, they both had different careers. They both transitioned to writers. So what was that transition like? I keep saying
Scary. Yeah, because you go from a paycheck to not having a paycheck. So challenging. I've had a number of different careers. I was actually a computer programmer for 10 years before I went to law school. I went to law school late. Before that, I was in grad school. I went to a seminary, not a creepy seminary, but a progressive radical seminary associated with Columbia University. And so I have always sort of done different things. And the nice thing about a writer, and I believe Louis Erdrich said this last night too, is all those experiences you've had are not wasted. You bring those to the table when you write, even if you're writing science fiction and fantasy. I'm still thinking about, like in some of my other works, jurisdictional issues in Indian country because I have the law background. And then there's just practical things that other careers teach you. So like writing, writers can be a little, with our time, we were like, maybe I should do 1,500 hours of research on the Maya instead of writing my novel. And so, being a lawyer also taught me some discipline that, because the courts will not wait. The courts do not give you extensions on your deadlines without a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So you can learn all kinds of other things, both practical and, sort of pragmatic from other careers. So what was it like to switch? It was terrifying. I didn't know if I could really make a living as a writer, but it worked out. You got to take chances. You got to take risks. And certainly we are artists. I think part of our job, part of our calling is to take risks. And if you fail, you fail. It's not the end of the world. You can always sort of pick yourself up and do something different. But yeah.
Well, I have not transitioned. I still have a day job. I am a tenured full professor and the director of the Native American Studies program at my university. So I don't know what it's like. I dream about it every day of just doing that, because not only do I teach at my university, but I pick up, I teach at various, I'm on the faculty of 2 MFA programs, and then I'm often asked to come and teach like the Institute of American Indian Arts or Sewanee and other places. So I do a lot of teaching, a lot of consulting and all that. So I don't know what it's like. What I do know is about getting up at 4 a.m. and writing from 4 to 6:30 before kids start getting up and pets start barking. So yeah. So I'll talk to you when I make that transition.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Oh, I think she had one first, I guess. Yeah.
I wanna do like story stuff too, and so I was wondering like, what do you think someone has to have to make it? Like, what do you think is a make or break quality?
What do you think is the make or break quality for writers?
Oh gosh. So I guess I'm going to answer that in a couple of ways. So I think, there aren't a whole lot of original stories per se out there, right? Like we've all sort of heard, sort of the main stories, but there are original experiences. And so you bring to the table your experience. And because no one has grown up exactly like you have, no one has gone through the same sort of trials and tribulations and triumphs as you have. So you have to be able to bring those to the page. And there's always a lot of jokes about, oh, I bled on the page. Writers have to bleed on the page. But I find that to be true. You have to put some of yourself into the story if you are afraid to do that, because it is terrifying. Because you're putting yourself out there and people are going to read it and judge you. And they're going to judge you harshly. But you have to be able, you have to dare. You have to do it. Because readers can tell when you're not genuine. They can tell when you're going through the motions or you're just, trying to be a writer because some people think it's a good thing, although, you don't get paid much or anything, unless you're Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. But you have to be real on the page, and you have to be honest. And it's that connection to your own humanity. If you can get that on the page, then readers can connect to that. And there's this sort of ironic thing that the more specific you are, the more universal the experience. Because people will see themselves in your characters if you put yourself into your characters. And I think that's sort of the make or break thing. The rest is all just, 99% luck, 1% being in the right place at the right time, skill, having people who support you, which is, sort of, yeah.
Well, I'll give my take on this. So to emerging writers, what I tell them is that, the skill you need to have is just tenacity and persistence, okay? Because you're going to be rejected as a writer, and that's just it. And it stings, okay? And we all get rejected. I don't care where you are in your career, you're going to be rejected at times. And the writer that will be successful is the person that will keep going. And I know that sounds like a cliche and really trite, but it is powerfully tempting after you've been rejected 10 or 20 times to just give up. So I recently, just 2 weeks ago, I interviewed the crime writer James Lee Burke. James Lee Burke had a couple of Big Five novels right out of the gate, and then he wrote a book, and it was rejected 115 times. 115 times, and then finally LSU Press took it, and then he's nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, and now he's one of the top crime writers. He won a Guggenheim. He's fantastic. But how he kept going after 115 rejections, that tells you a lot about him. And so I would urge you to get that warrior spirit and harness that and keep going. But that also means put in the work. Because there are a lot of students that, I find a lot of students that they think that their work is perfect right off the bat. And I have to kind of gently say, well, no, no. So keep doing the work and keep that spirit of persistence.
Alrighty, that was like a perfect closing statement. I would like to are you guys doing signings after? Or I'm not sure, but if you have, I was just gonna say if you have more questions, just walk up to him and pat him on the back.
Is
real
there
hard. But,
anyone after us? There's no one after.
no, we're good till. I mean, there's going to be a reading at the Wilma at 5:30 with Montana writers, but 7 o'clock we're going to have David Troyer there, so that'll be awesome. So, but at 5:30 to 6:30, Montana writers are going to be doing a reading at the Wilma. So, I would like everyone to thank Rebecca and David for entertaining us. That was great.